Hello and welcome to WGTC Radio, presented by the entertainment website We Got This Covered. I'm Jonathan Lack.
And I'm Sean Chapman.
And we're here to talk about stuff.
We are.
Or more stuff that we were talking about last week.
That's true. It's a continuation of stuff that you may have listened to previously as another form of stuff.
Yes. Much like Seven Samurai, which was Sean's number 6 choice for the list we're doing, this podcast has been split into 2 distinct halves.
Yes.
And
Although I wish we had an intermission.
That would be cool. If we could do like the visual thing where they have the awesome kanji there that says intermission. And then, the drum sounds.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Last week, on the first installment of WGTC Radio, Sean and I began counting down our top 10 favorite movies of all time. We hope you listened to that and enjoyed it. If you somehow have come to WGTC Radio number 2 and have not heard number 1, go back and listen to number 1. You can find it in iTunes. You can subscribe.
Or if you don't care about our bottom 5 favorite movies.
That's true.
And you only want to hear our top 5 favorite movies.
Yes.
This is the place to go.
Yes, we're going to talk about our 5 favorite movies each. We did numbers 10 through 6 last week. This is numbers 5 through 1, and we're just going to jump right into it. So, Sean, I believe it's your turn. You're going to go with number 5. I'm going to pour myself a soda. You may hear that on the track. But Sean, you're going to talk about number 5 while we do that.
Okay, my number 5 is Citizen Kane, a somewhat stereotypical movie to put on a favorite movies ever list.
God, Sean, this is so boring.
Well, at least my list is made of good movies. Summary movies are okay. But, Citizen Kane, if you haven't heard, it's very much the critic favorite of what they would call the best movie of all time, which I think is ridiculous to say that any form of, narrative or media is the best of anything ever.
At the very least, you have to limit it to the country of origin or something, because there's no way you've seen all of, say, Japanese cinema or something.
But even then, it's even evaluating what it is, it's the best. Yeah. That's ridiculous. I don't even like a best list. I'm glad we're doing a favorite list.
Exactly.
But Citizen Kane is a movie that, a lot of people don't like it because they just don't like slow black and white movies. I love slow black and white movies because that's kind of the style of movie I grew up on. And Citizen Kane really, it's not the best movie of all time, but it's a really damn good movie, and you can understand why critics love it as much as they do. And it's also made by another person that, I really personally admire and I think is a really interesting and fascinating person, is one of my favorite directors / actors, is Orson Welles, who is kind of, he was a genius. A filmmaking genius. He was a genius at acting. He was just a genius person who had a really fascinating life where he traveled through Europe. He met, Winston Churchill. He met Hitler. He's done so... He's such a fascinating person to listen to, find interviews on YouTube and stuff like that. And this is his magnum opus. He made it when he was... I think he was in his early 20s. He was a young guy when he made this movie. And the movie is about a newspaper mogul called Kane, who he grew up when he was a small child. He was living in a house that he wasn't very wealthy, but his family got access to a mine that made them really wealthy. They got a lot of money, and his family sent him off into Europe, kind of actually similar to how the actual Orson Welles' life actually was, where he traveled around Europe. He had a lot of money. He learned from all the best schools. He was a very educated man in the movie. And then he comes back and decides he's going to run a newspaper because he's kind of bored, and he just kind of wants to do it. And the movie it starts where Kane is dead. Spoilers that's the first scene of the movie.
How could you, Sean?
Kane dies. He says his last word is Rosebud. And to do a story, Joseph Cotton, who plays a news reporter, decides he's going to go around, ask the people who knew Kane during his life what Rosebud was and try to find out who Kane was as a person. And so the story is told mostly in flashbacks of Joseph Cotton going around interviewing people important to Kane and getting snippets of who Kane was. And it's a character study of the character of Kane and it's really about kind of what wealth does to a person, really excessive wealth. And it's a very sort of American movie with very American themes. But what makes it really special is Orson Welles playing Kane, where you see him play Kane from when he's a young sort of playboy deciding I'm just going to go to a newspaper. He's very much an idealist. And then seeing him slowly evolve into this old sort of corrupt businessman who doesn't care much about other people. He tries to be a politician and he fails. He marries this like beautiful girl who's a lot younger than he is, but he like ruins that marriage and he kind of his life falls apart and you follow that journey with him. And it's just a really incredible performance by Orson Welles. It's such a well shot movie. The way they tell the story is so involving where you get it's like you're trying to piece together the character as Joseph Cotton is, and you get all these different perspectives based on the people he goes and talks to. Like he talks to his estranged wife, he talks to his old friend, he talks to his business partner, and you get all these. And Kane is such a complex character with like these really complex ideals, and it's just a fascinating character study. And there's so many moments in the movie that just visually are really amazing. Like the movie ends. I should say also there's a lot of controversy around the movie, especially when it came out, that actually caused the movie to kind of fail financially because it's kind of half a biopic of real-life newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst. And it's like the movie, I mean, you can really tell there's a documentary on basically any DVD you can find comes packaged with Citizen Kane and this documentary they did about the sort of war between Orson Welles and William Randolph Hearst revolving around this movie. Because a lot of the stuff, obviously, in the movie is taken from Hearst's actual real life, and he didn't want the movie to be shown. And so he used William Randolph Hearst used his real life power and influence to try to keep the movie out of the theaters, to try to keep people to say it's not a good movie, to try to keep it from making money, which, weirdly enough, is exactly the kind of thing that old Kane in the movie would have done in like that exact situation. It's really bizarre. But it's also really interesting because it's not just, it's like the character of Kane is, because I know a lot about like the real life situation because I love this movie so much. It's like the actual character of Kane seems like a conglomeration of William Randolph Hearst and Orson Welles himself, where there's a lot of, obviously, Welles thrown into it, and it's actually weirdly prescient about what happened to Welles later in life, where because Citizen Kane didn't really make money, even though, like, every Orson Welles movie is an amazing, amazing movie. Every Orson Welles performance is an amazing, amazing performance. Most of his movies didn't make much money, partially because Citizen Kane didn't, and it was only considered a huge, like, success and, like, a huge critical success later in its life of people really looking back on it.
It's exactly the same as another Orson Welles movie, Transformers the movie from 1986. Where he voiced and gave his heart and soul to Unicron, but the movie didn't do well until much later when people discovered it on home video.
I mean, that's really tragic. Sorry, because I mean, Orson Welles. I mean, he did voice on Transformers the movie, which is actually really good, fun, really good, fun cartoon movie. But he voiced it was his last role ever, and he voiced Unicron, who's kind of like the big villain. It just doesn't have a whole lot of lines in the movie. But people who interviewed Orson Welles afterwards said it's a nasty little movie about robots killing each other. And it's just really, Orson Welles is just such a fascinating person. And this movie, it's just like, it's so weirdly prescient about his actual life. It says so many interesting things. It's such a well done character study. And I mean, one of the reasons everyone says it's the best movie ever is because it was hugely influential, particularly in sort of like, it pioneered some technology, it pioneered sort of like cinematography techniques, like there are a lot of lower angles, there's a lot of actually like really kind of artsy shots. Like there's one shot that I love that's near the end of the movie where Kane is trying to chase after his wife that's going to leave him, and he stumbles upon this hallway where it's like this, like with two adjoining mirrors on either side, and it's just like an infinite stream of like Kane standing in that hallway, like back into like as far as you can see into the frame of the camera, just like a beautiful shot. And there's just this great scene where Kane's life is falling apart, and he just sort of really silently like freaks out, and he's just like tearing this room he's in apart. He's just like throwing bookcases around. He's just completely destroying this room, but he doesn't say a word. Like he just like it's just like the physical presence. Because Orson Welles was also like this really, really. He was like 6'4". He's this really tall guy, like an immense physical presence, like this really deep, engaging voice. Because he started in radio, so he knew how to use his voice really well, and just gives this really iconic performance. But another thing that's great about Citizen Kane is listening to, or is like reading reviews online of like college film students who are like trying to like bring it down a notch because it's supposed to be the greatest movie ever. There's like one. I remember one of my favorite. It's like one of my favorite things to do is to go on Netflix and read user reviews for like really critically acclaimed movies, because you'll find some of the funniest goddamn reviews. Like there was one where this guy was trying to say that he was like, he understood like what an art movie was because he had seen Good Will Hunting, and so that meant, because that was like the art. That's the pinnacle of like art movie to him, and so he was like, I can judge an artsy movie because I've seen Good Will Hunting. And then there's another guy who said that it's like Citizen Kane. It's like, oh, it's such a great movie. I mean, come on, anyone can freak out and tear a room apart. It's like I can act that scene. It's like really, it's like. You think you can act as well as like one of the greatest performances in the history of cinema just because he's tearing a room apart? It's like, it's not just because he's tearing a room apart. It's like how he does it.
And probably everything leading up to it.
Yeah, and all, like all the character build-up leading up to it. It's like this huge dramatic moment in the movie. And the guy's like, I could do that.
Well, you were talking about the cinematography in this movie. In my film textbook for my intro to film class in college, the cinematography chapter, like every page had frames from Citizen Kane on it, and like everything there was an example, like, and now we'll talk about the low angle shot, and we'll talk about Citizen Kane, and it's like, it was cool, and it's
like movie. It really is. It's a staple of how you make a modern movie. Like it's just such a. I mean, it's a really. I mean, I can understand some of the complaints because it is a really slow paced movie, and it's only a character study. Like there's no like anyone looking for like action. Don't go to Citizen Kane.
But I love character studies.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like it's solely a character study about Kane, and it's a really interesting movie. And it's like I don't know if it's like the best movie ever, but it's definitely one of the best. It's definitely one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces there is, and I think it deserves a spot on anyone's favorite list who's seen it. Like maybe someone who like writes reviews and purports to really love movies and be very educated about movies would probably put this on their list.
Here's the thing. Sean does not make fun of me for these things in real life, only on the podcast.
Please don't break the illusion.
Sorry. I'll edit that part out.
Okay.
No, I have not seen Citizen Kane. I'm sorry.
For shame.
Half the thing is, I never have time to watch classic movies because I'm always like reviewing new movies and stuff, and I don't like that sometimes. I can guarantee you I would much rather sit down and watch Citizen Kane than go have to review,
Madagascar 3?
Sure. Which I did not have to review, thank God, but I do have to see the new Adam Sandler movie next week. And you know what? I would much rather spend my Wednesday night watching Citizen Kane. Oh well.
My head went in a really weird place. I was thinking Citizen Kane with Adam Sandler instead of Orson Welles. That would be an amazing movie.
The one thing about Citizen Kane is also makes it a little hard to see is it's not widely available the way some classic movies are. I know it has a DVD, but like that's out of print now because they've now got the Blu-ray version, and the Blu-ray is a box set that's like $50. And I know it's a great movie, and someday I'll drop the money and get it, but it's like it's not on streaming anywhere or anything like that, so it's sort of a little harder to see than some classic movies.
Yeah, but I mean, it also, I mean, if you find the DVD for it that has the documentary with it, it's a really fascinating documentary.
Do you have the DVD?
Yeah, I do.
I could just borrow it from you sometime, I guess.
Like I would give it to you.
You had my Spider-Man DVDs for like 2 years.
You don't have any evidence of that. Anyways,
time to move on to my number 5. All right, so for my number 5, I want to emphasize again something we said on part 1 of this podcast, which is that when we're ranking movies we love this much, the ranks, you shouldn't put too much stock into them.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to do this, and for me, the hardest ranking on this entire list was between my number 5 and number 4 choices. It's a virtual tie. I love these movies equally. It just kind of came down to how I'm feeling today. For number 5 and number 4, they could be swapped as soon as tomorrow, and it really doesn't matter. It's just a ranking, whatever. But I just wanted you to keep that in mind. I really do like number 5 and number 4 pretty much equally, and so my number 5 choice, though, is another Hayao Miyazaki movie. And
breaking your own rules.
Yes.
But not using multiple directors.
I know.
And this is one director multiple times.
This is, in its original Japanese, Mononoke Hime, or Princess Mononoke in its English translation. And this is Hayao Miyazaki's 1997 movie. This is what I and many others feel is his masterpiece, his greatest movie. And it is just a really incredible work of art. It is easily the greatest animated movie of all time. And it's the kind of animated...
Well, I mean, we just mentioned one that's probably better, the Transformers 1986 animated masterpiece featuring Orson Welles himself as Unicron. The greatest thespians in the history of mankind.
Oh my god, I love that Transformers movie in a cheesy, 80s rock way, but it's...
I mean, it's got Orson Welles and Weird Al Yankovic. It's the best animated movie ever.
Okay. Anyway, Princess Mononoke is the kind, and I think it's maybe one of the only animated movies I've ever seen like this, where it is so vast in its ambition and epic in its execution, and it tells such a large story, and it's so visually just rapturous. You forget it's animated as you're watching it. You just get so caught up in it. And it's the kind of movie where every time I watch it, I'm just immediately taken in and riveted. And it's like, do you have movies where you watch them like this, where every time you see it, it's almost like you're seeing it for the first time? It has such power to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Princess Mononoke does. And it's a long movie. It's about 2.5 hours long. And for animation, I have no idea how they did that. Because it's not like the quality is down in any part.
Yeah.
It's one of his most beautifully animated movies. But it's really amazing. The basic story, if you've never heard of it, and I can't recommend this movie highly enough, obviously, is that it happens during the Muromachi period of Japanese history, I believe. Yes, Muromachi. And and in this period, they still have samurai and stuff, but Hayao Miyazaki's intent, and he talks about this in his book Starting Point, which I highly recommend, his intent was not to show the kinds of people that we usually see in historical Japanese epics. It wasn't about the samurai, and it's not about the warring classes and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's more about the little people we don't usually talk about.
It's about the little people.
So the main character is this prince in this village named Ashitaka, and I should note, too,
little person.
When we talk about prince and princess, it's a very different idea of what those words mean than in American Disney animation. How Hayao Miyazaki uses the terms prince and princess in this movie, which are actually not said much in the movie, if at all. I don't think the word Princess Mononoke is ever said in the film. And what it means is that it's supposed to be an inheritor to a sort of a grander idea. And that's what it's about, it's about that these people, the Prince Ashitaka, who's the main character, and Princess Mononoke, whose actual name is San. Mononoke is a term involving a lot of it's a sort of more of a thematic term. And they are they are the inheritors to this world. They are the people who are going to have to fix it after the adults in their lives have sort of ruined it. And that's how they are sort of the prince and princess of this world. It's a thematic thing. It's not a literal thing. But anyway, Ashitaka is this prince from this village.
So there's no sequel called Queen Mononoke?
No. Oh. But so anyway, the whole plot is that at the beginning of the movie, Ashitaka, who sort of, I don't think he really is a samurai, but he has some sort of that kind of training, and he has to fight to defend his village this demon boar. And this boar has come and it's attacking the village and it's infected in some way. And obviously, he is not supposed to kill these creatures. That's against his own teachings. But he has to do it to defend the village and to put this boar out of its misery. It's a boar god, actually. And that's why it's wrong for him to do this. It's a forest spirit. But it's been infected by this demon power. And when he kills it, the demon power infects Ashitaka, and he is going to die in a few weeks. He's cursed, and he's going to die.
See, if this was like a serial, shonen anime, right there, he would have demon powers, and he would learn how to wield them to fight, the same 5 people over the course of 300 episodes. And he would, he would learn, a new superpower. He would shoot a demon laser out of his hand, and then later he would turn into a half demon that could fly.
Yeah, he does.
And he would turn into a robot.
He does get a little bit of power from the demon thing. It's just that his arm, he becomes a better archer, but it's not a big deal.
That's lame.
It's
not
supposed
laser
to be
arrows.
You need to see the archers. The archer scenes in this.
I have seen the movie, but it's been such a long time. But I remember it being really, really good.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, but what I was trying to say is, so he gets this demon power. He's infected, and the village elder tells him that he needs to go out into the world, and I remember this line very clearly because it's one of my favorite movie lines, and see with eyes unclouded. And that's how he needs to go view the world and try to find a harmony that maybe he cannot fix his own curse, but stop this from happening to others. And so he goes out to explore, and it's a very big journey until he ends up at this iron town, this ironworks, led by, it's sort of a female-driven society. It's a matriarchal society he runs into, led by this woman, Lady Eboshi. And Lady Eboshi is sort of in this war with the forest spirits, because this iron village is in the middle of this giant forest, and they're using the forest for their own means, and for, for humankind's, needs, and trying to build industry and whatnot. And sort of the plot of the and in this part of the movie, obviously Ashitaka meets San, who's this girl who lives. She's been raised by wolves, and she is the titular Princess Mononoke of the title. She hates humans. She's fighting against Lady Eboshi, and this is what Ashitaka comes to the middle of. And his whole mission of seeing with eyes unclouded, to me, is what the movie is about, because we're put in the middle of this very, very complicated conflict between warring factions and warring states. And Miyazaki does not draw good. There's no good people and there's no bad people, really.
There are iron people and wolf people.
Sort of. Because the humans have good reason for doing what they're doing. And he doesn't make it simple like, oh, Lady Eboshi is evil because she's taking down trees. They need this to live. And they need to find a way to do this. But at the same time, the forest spirits, they were there first. They have a right to this. And it's a very complicated issue, and it becomes very much an exploration of hatred and why we hate and where hate comes from.
It sounds like a not stupid version of Avatar.
It is. It's a not stupid version, sort of. And Avatar is so black and white, and that's what I don't like about it. I like Avatar to a certain degree, but that's the failing of the movie. That's what this movie is about, and Ashitaka, because he's the one who's been afflicted by this hate most directly, he is going to die from it. And he has to deal with this, and he has to sort of bring San around to the same idea and teach her that there's maybe something bigger she can do than just hate. And from there, it's a movie that is hard to talk about if you haven't seen it and sort of felt the power of it. Sean, you say you saw this and loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it's seriously, like, I remember, I must have been, like, probably 8 years old, something like that. I was pretty young, and I just remember seeing it, and it had a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
a really emotionally resonant movie.
There's so many great scenes. This is sort of like Seven Samurai to me, where I can just list all these great characters and scenes that have really affected me in my sort of film life. And I think one of them is where Ashitaka it's this great long sequence where San has come to attack the ironworks. And Ashitaka is trying to stop her and the wolves without killing any of them and without killing any of the villagers. And to do it, he basically takes this arrow to the chest. And it's going to kill him even faster. And San...
Until he builds his Iron Man suit.
And San takes him back to the forest, and there's this sort of beautiful sequence where she's trying to help him, and they play... I don't know if this is the part where they play the sort of theme song of the movie, but it's this beautiful, soft Japanese song. And it's just sort of those images that are ingrained in my head of how they start really dealing with sort of these themes of hatred and of what is happening to these characters. And I think Princess Mononoke is a movie that thematically becomes more relevant as time passes, and as people become more aware of sort of the horrors of war in our world and the horrors of industrialization and of environmentalism and stuff. Not the horrors of environmentalism.
The horrors of environmentalism! The trees! All the trees!
But, in his book Starting Point, which is a collection of essays by Hayao Miyazaki from the years when many of his films were made, he writes a little bit about the movie, and I wanted to read this excerpt because it informs my own interpretation of the movie. And he says, the Muromachi period, and this is when Mononoke is set, was intrinsically different from the Warring States period, when organized battles were fought by regular standing armies, and it was also different from the Kakamura period, when warriors fiercely protected their allotted land holdings. It was a period of mobility, when the distinction between warriors and peasants was less entrenched, and as in the paintings that show women as craftspersons, society was more broad-minded and free. In a period like this, the outlines of life and death were more distinct. People lived, loved, hated, worked, and died. Life was not ambiguous. This is precisely why it is important to make this film as we enter the chaotic times of the 21st century. And I think that informs a lot of what the movie does well, is what he's describing there, is where he chose to set it and how it becomes universal to our life, because it is possible in this setting he has, even though there's a lot of fantasy elements, obviously, to really analyze sort of deep issues about humanity that are universal to any time period we're living in. And I think the things the movie has to say about any kind of conflict, because it is about seeing with eyes unclouded and seeing that in any conflict there's good and bad on both sides, and there's no such thing as, pure evil and pure good and pure heroics. But then also, obviously, the environment, which is one of Hayao Miyazaki's biggest themes. It's in all his movies, and it's a big one here. But I think also about how he still... This is another movie where his characters are a little bit older than his normal youth protagonists. They're young adults, but they're still younger than
they're reading, like, Harry Potter and Twilight?
No. Intelligent young adults. And they... But they're still younger than all the other characters,
Yeah.
is my point. And they have to learn they are the inheritors of this world. Again, that goes back to the prince and princess themes. And there's the way the film ends, the last line is, San finally admits to Ashitaka, she says, I like you, but there's, and the quote is actually here, I like you, Ashitaka, but I can never forgive humanity. And he says, that's all right, let's live together in peace. So they can never really be together. They have to live in the Iron Town.
Kind of like the relationship between Charles Xavier and Magneto. Only it's a bit more destructive, but I mean, they go through phases where it's like, we're friends, but I can't forgive humanity's prejudices.
Yes.
And you all.
But
you
San,
can't.
but the difference is San
Can't manipulate metal with her mutant
I was also
abilities.
going to say,
and she doesn't go around wearing like a red and purple cape.
This is true. I was also going to say San at the end decides she wants to help everybody, not just...
Well, I mean, Magneto goes through those phases. I mean, you don't know, the sequel could be she turns into a supervillain again.
Yes, that's true.
And then Ashitaka has to raise his pupil that then gets possessed by an alien energy force called the Phoenix Force.
Okay.
And he becomes the Dark Phoenix.
Yes, and
yeah.
Can I finish talking about the movie and then we can get into nerdy references?
I mean, I'm done with my nerdy references.
That's good.
I think.
And all I'm trying to say is that I think it's very much about how the problems that adults make in the world are sort of left to the youth, and that if we can learn from those experiences and try to work together, even if we have different interests, to build a better sort of future. And Miyazaki's movies have these optimistic endings, but they're earned. And Princess Mononoke especially, because the level of destruction in this movie, that's probably something you remember.
Yeah.
The climactic battle, it's epic and it's sad and hard to watch, because the forest becomes a character in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And when forest spirits start dying and things start happening, it's really hard to watch. Especially, there's the great scene, the running of the boar gods.
Yeah, I remember that.
Where they're attacking, they're getting gunned down and slaughtered, and Ashitaka
Mufasa's hanging on, and then Scar pushes them off. Yeah.
And Ashitaka is desperately trying to stop them, but it's got the best animated action I've ever seen. There's this great shot that's all in one edit. And I mean, I know animated movies don't have shots, but they still, it's just harder to do a long animated shot. And it's where Ashitaka jumps off his steed, Yakul, who is awesome. Yakul is great. And he jumps off, and there's these two samurai who are coming to attack him. He jumps off, takes an arrow, puts it in his bow, fires it, and then fires another one, and both they shoot the guys' heads off, and it's a great just single shot of action. And there's stuff like that throughout the movie. It's amazing. It's got one of, if not my favorite film scores of all time. Joe Hisaishi's musical score here. You were talking about music in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and when you hear it, it makes you feel emotional for that. It's the same with Princess Mononoke. I listen to that score a lot, sort of for inspiration as I'm writing or whatever. And it's the same kind of thing. It is an amazing, amazing score performed by the Japanese Philharmonic Orchestra, and it just sounds beautiful. Great stuff. Miyazaki has continued to do amazing things since then, including Spirited Away, which is obviously a very significant work in film history. But I don't think he's ever quite made something that is this deeply personal and this epic again. And it's one of my favorite movies. It's sort of been with me for a long time. It's hard for me to remember a time before this movie. But do you have any other things to say about it?
A time before Mononoke, when the world was young.
Do you have anything else to say about this movie? Because you've seen it, but it's been a while.
Yeah, but it's been I don't remember a lot of this. I mean, you talking about it is making me remember a lot about the movie. But yeah, I mean, I can't recommend it highly enough. I mean, I love those sort of really. There's something about Japanese animation that when it's done like that, it's something really special. And I think Mononoke is kind of the pinnacle of that, for at least of all the things that I've seen. Yeah. So I agree with everything you've said. Yeah. Can't recommend it highly enough.
In terms of, we talked about subtitled versus dubbed for Totoro. Mononoke, if you just cannot stand the Japanese language or something, you can watch the dub. It's very good. It's not my preferred version, just because I am a sort of original language guy, but I have no issues with it, except Billy Bob Thornton is sort of a weird casting choice. I'll go with that.
Who does Billy Bob Thornton play?
He plays the guy who's sent by the Emperor, and he's got he's sort of the short
Darth
guy
Vader?
with the big nose.
No, not Darth Vader.
No, he's the short guy with the big nose and sort of the wooden boots. And he's not a huge character, but he's sort of the closest thing the film has to a straight antagonist, I guess, because he's a dick to everybody. But he's trying to get the head of the forest god. But it's you may not remember it because it's not a huge part specifically. But other than that, I mean, it's a good dub. It was actually, you're going to like this, Sean. It was adapted the language by Neil Gaiman.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and so it's got a very lyrical adaptation. The theme song of the movie, he also translated and adapted, and it sounds really good. So you don't lose anything watching the dub. I would still recommend the original Japanese because the performances there, particularly by the people who play Ashitaka and San, are incredible. And there's some scenes Ashitaka has that are just so nuanced and beautiful, and to get that through vocal performance is really interesting. There's some other voices I like very much. But yeah, you can watch it either way. It's sort of a weird, in terms of availability, you can get the DVD for like $5 anywhere, I'm sure, online. I mean, they don't sell anime in stores much anymore. But it was released by Miramax in 1998, and the DVD has not changed since then. It's the only one that hasn't gotten like a re-release or anything. And it's
just weird because it's like, it's like not only just us, but it's like a lot of people like really loud. It's a really like critically acclaimed movie.
Yes.
So and it's kind of weird that it hasn't had like a big release.
Yeah, it doesn't have any bonus features. It's just the movie in English and Japanese. It does have a great subtitle track, so that's nice. But the print they used is kind of dirty, so I'm kind of hoping one day we get a better visual version of it because it's such great animation. It would be nice not to have print damage on it and stuff. But, get it. It's a good deal. It's a good DVD. I hope we get a special edition at least for the storyboards, because all the special editions of Miyazaki's movies have the complete storyboards, which are interesting to look at. Maybe you don't want to sit down and watch the whole movie that way, but they're still interesting to study. So that's Princess Mononoke Hime, and that's my number 5. Sean, let's move on to your number 4. And I'm so excited to talk with you about this.
My number 4 is 2001, A Space Odyssey. This is another one like Kurosawa and Orson Welles. This is another one. Kubrick is Kubrick's my favorite director. I've seen almost all of his movies, even like some of like his more obscure earlier ones, and there's something about Kubrick where he is so meticulous about everything in his movies that's just like really catches me for some reason.
And you know what? When you first told me about Kubrick and the meticulousness, and that's why you loved him, I didn't quite understand it because I don't know if I exactly knew what you meant. But then when I started really studying Miyazaki's movies, I guess that's when I sort of got it, because that's the same reason Miyazaki is my favorite director.
Yeah, it's like everything is intentional.
Yeah. And it's such an auteur thing.
It's just like, and it's like 2001, for me, this is, like 2001, I'm just going to go out and say it is the weirdest, like most unique movie I've ever seen. Like, I've never seen anything quite like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I completely agree.
Yeah, it's weird even by Kubrick, who another reason why I love Kubrick as a director is because he doesn't make the same movie twice. He's not like Tim Burton, who's like, Tim Burton's like, I'm just going to do the same. It's like when you see a trailer for a Tim Burton movie, it's like the first 5 seconds is like, this is a Tim Burton movie, brought to you by Tim Burton.
Well, and Tim Burton's gotten even worse. He's gotten to the point where he's remaking his own movies.
Yes, it's like, because I saw Prometheus recently, and there was a trailer for, it looked like it was like a Frankenstein thing, but it was like Frankenweenie.
That's his original short film. It's
famous. And it's like, you see like 2 seconds of it, it's like, oh fuck, this is Tim Burton. Okay, but anyways,
back to Stanley Kubrick.
But Stanley Kubrick, he doesn't do that. He makes he's made The Shining, which is a horror movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a science fiction movie, Full Metal Jacket, which is a war movie, The Killing, which is one of his earlier ones. It's like a crime movie. He's made. There's Spartacus, which is like a historical period piece. It's like
Dr. Strangelove?
Dr. Strangelove, which is a comedy. Like, it's actually hard to remember all the movies because they're so different.
He didn't even work in the same genre twice.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, he's made like a defining movie for every single genre of like movie, other than like just like a straight action adventure.
And probably invented a genre with whatever the fuck Eyes Wide Shut is.
Yeah, like that's what I was thinking. I was going to say, I was trying to figure out what the genre was going to be for that one. But yeah, it's like, he's just like a really fascinating director. And usually, Clockwork Orange, which is another one, which is kind of sci-fi, but it's like, it's more dystopian. Like, it's like sci-fi, but it's like the opposite side of sci-fi.
That's in the Malcolm McDowell genre.
Yeah, but it's like, and actually, normally, I would probably pick Clockwork Orange because I also really love that book. And I love that story and the themes in that story. But there's something about 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is just such a weird movie. And I love it so much. Like, I love everything about it, even though if someone came up to me and is like, you like 2001: A Space Odyssey? That is I watched 5 minutes of that movie and I fell asleep. I was being like, I totally get that, dude.
Of course
I understand. It's like, I will not make fun of someone for disliking 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's not like, if you say it's like you didn't like it, I'm not going to be like, you're an idiot, you couldn't appreciate the movie. It's like, this is not an easy movie to watch. It's not a fun movie to watch. I would actually probably describe it as a boring movie. Like, it's a boring movie, but it is fucking fascinating. And there's just something so, fascinating about it. It's so visual, everything. I mean, it's so visually meticulous. Everything in the movie is put there on purpose. Stanley Kubrick knew what was going to be in every single shot, how long every shot was going to last. It's like, everything just feels so intentional. And, like, everything is, like, it just feels so perfect. All the, like, every single individual shot in the movie feels so perfect. Well, even though it's so visual that there's no real coherent story. You have to interpret the story. You have to kind of understand what, like, the books and kind of understand stuff out of it. Like, just taking the movie as itself, it's very confusing. There's, like, very little dialogue, not a lot's explained. There are, like, the movie's kind of sectioned off into very distinct areas. Like, there's the beginning that's all about
apes.
Yeah, the apes. It starts out on Earth, like, fucking, like, 3000 BC with, like, or longer than that, but it's like 8 people, like, encountering the monolith that's kind of like the standard that connects all the pieces of the movies, this big alien monolith artifact. That my interpretation of the monolith is that it sort of, like, it accelerates intelligence and evolutionary development, and it's like, that's kind of like a thread that carries through the movie. It's like, so it kind of evolves apes, and it implies that it evolves the apes into people. Then you get a section where it's these people who are on, like, space stations, and they find another one of them on the moon, and then it cuts to the most famous segment of the movie, which is 2 astronauts on a space shuttle going
to Jupiter.
I believe they're going to Titan, the moon around Jupiter, and they've got the artificial intelligence HAL, which is running the ship, and then you have that section of the movie, and then you kind of have the coda section after they defeat HAL. Spoilers, it's a 50-year-old movie. But they defeat HAL, and then it's the last remaining astronaut,
also
Dave,
known as the avant-garde section of the movie.
where he gets transported. I mean, there's a lot of different. There's a million ways to interpret, like, how this movie ends, and he gets transported. He's on his way to Titan, where they've detected another one of the monoliths. That's why they get sent, and he discovers that when he defeats HAL, and I think he gets transported to either a faraway planet by the monolith, or he gets transported into, like, a higher plane of existence, like another dimension, where either the monolith itself or the artificial intelligences or the extra, like, whatever the fuck the things that made the monoliths are sort of examining him as a human specimen, and it's him sort of, like, in this weird, distorted, constructed space where, like, time is just, like, compressed, and you see him, like, age very rapidly between, like, these very, like, odd, obscure cuts, and then he turns into a star baby. Which is the only
fetus.
It's a fetus, and it's like, the way I interpret it is it's the next stage of human evolutionary development. But that's the movie. But
Can we?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a direction I want to go with this conversation that I think is going to be
This
the
is
most
so hard to talk about this fucking movie.
I think the best way we're going to do this is that. So, Sean told me last week we were making plans for this podcast, and he said, "Jonathan, the movie 2001 is on my list. You need to watch it." And I said, "I'll watch it. That's fine." I own the Stanley Kubrick old DVD box set, so I just pulled it out. And this morning before the podcast, I decided to sit down and watch it.
Wait, it was this morning?
I watched it this morning.
Oh, God. I didn't realize it was that recent.
I thought it would be a good idea.
Yeah.
So it's in my mind. And when Sean came over, he knocks on my front door and he opens it, and I say, "Sean, I saw 2001. He says, "Did you like it?" And I said, "What the fuck?"
I was like, I don't know.
I don't know. So I watched 2001, and I think I felt every emotion you can feel while watching a movie. I was bored. I was riveted. I was fascinated. I was, like, turned off. I was, like, everything you could feel. And basically the whole time I was like, I cannot wait to talk with someone who has, like, absorbed this movie.
Yeah, I've seen it several times. Probably at least 4 times I've seen the movie.
And I've only seen it once. So I think the best thing to do is just go through the movie sequentially, and I'm going to quiz you, and maybe we can talk about our collective interpretations of it. But let's start at the beginning. The apes. The Dawn of Man.
Dawn of Man. Yeah.
It's about an 18-minute sequence, which I know because for some reason, this movie has a lot of chapters on the DVD, but that's all in one chapter for some reason.
But I like how, like, as someone's gonna, like, jump into, like, the middle, like, of the movie, it's like, you have to watch the movie in one sitting. Like, you couldn't, like, stop and go back to it. You would just be so disoriented.
Yes. It creates sort of a state of mind. But yes, so the first question I want to ask is, What do you think audiences in 1968 thought when they sat down to watch what was advertised as a sci-fi epic and saw a bunch of apes fighting?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it is a really strange way of opening the movie, but I really like that. I really like how that section looks.
It looks great
because it's so different from because the rest of the movie, the palette is so white because it's like they're in like most of the rest of the movie takes place on space stations, which are all white, which is what makes Hal look so interesting because he's like this black box with a red eye in the middle.
He's the monolith with a red eye.
Yeah, basically. Only it's like small. But yeah, and then you have like the orange spacesuit. So there's like usually the palette's really white with like a few standout elements like the spacesuit or Hal himself. But the beginning of the movie, it's like these very natural colors. It's all like brown. It's sort of, I mean, it almost kind of looks like it's a Western. Like it's got that sort of.
There's a lot of beautiful matte paintings.
Yeah, it's like, and they have like really long open landscapes, and it's like, and then you have the apes, which are just like people in ape suits. But
they look really good.
Yeah, they look really good, and like. And there's like, because I've watched all manner of documentaries about 2001: A Space Odyssey, so you kind of need to because part of the fun of the movie is kind of understanding how they did the movie, because some of the stuff is insanely impressive. That I guess
know.
We'll get to.
Douglas Trumbull is a god.
But like, it's so interesting because they interviewed. I saw this one like documentary. It was like 20 years later, and they were interviewing a lot of people in the movie, and they interviewed like one of the guy he was like the lead ape guy, like the one that goes up and like touches the monolith and all that stuff. And he was saying like how Stanley Kubrick like had him go to like a zoo to like study. It's like even though it's a really small section of the movie, like at the very beginning, that's like relatively unimportant to the majority of the rest of the film. It's like Stanley Kubrick was so specific that he wanted very specific ape-like performances, and it really shows because the ape performances are really naturalistic.
Yes, I actually when it started I was like, are those suits?
Yeah, because a lot of them like the easiest way to tell is the legs, because human legs are a lot longer than chimpanzee legs. It's like, so that's how you can spot it really easily.
Yeah.
But if you just like the casual observer that's not really looking at it, they look like they're actual like chimpanzees.
And the thing I kept thinking is, what were the actors thinking when they get on set and Stanley Kubrick says, "Okay, put this on," and you're going to go around going, you know?
Yeah, it's like,
and they have to eat the meat, like the raw meat, and then
there's like, and like that section of the movie is so interesting because it's so different from everything else.
And you know, from a visual perspective, one of my favorite shots in the movie is when the monkey finds the bones.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a million times before even seeing the movie, because that shot is repeated everywhere.
Yeah.
And he picks up the bones, and they play the famous iconic musical cue again, and he's breaking them, and it's a low angle, but it almost looks like the monkey is on like another plane of being or something.
Yeah, it's because it's kind of like because that's after they've encountered the monolith for the first time, and it's sort of implied that now the monkey knows, I can like use this bone as a tool, as a weapon, and it's like, and that's the most significant development in like human history. Really is. I mean, obviously, probably it didn't work like that, but it's understanding that you can use your hands to make tools and to create things, but that you also create weapons and use weapons.
And this is great. I mean, I don't want to leave the ape part right away, but. They did then have the fight with the bones, and then we have the most famous jump cut of all time, which I've seen before too, where they throw the bone up, and as it comes back down, it turns into the satellite.
Yeah, which if you know the history behind the movie, the satellite's supposed to be. They cut this out of the movie because it doesn't need to be there, but it's supposed to be like a nuclear weapons satellite like delivery system. So it's kind of it's supposed to be saying, but you don't really need this for the movie. It's that. The humanity, like the bone is the original weapon, and then it shows humanity's development into creating like the ultimate weapon of our day.
And so you jump cut millions and millions of years.
Literally millions of years into the future.
But before we talk about that section of the movie, with the apes, I mean, what do you think is the ultimate meaning of the ape section? Because I think you're clarifying it.
Yeah, I think for me, the ape section is really, it's starting at the beginning and showing that... and to set the stage for what the monolith is, because it's the connecting piece for all the disparate pieces of the movie, it's showing that the monolith is basically what creates mankind, and it introduces this mystery of what is it doing, why is it doing this, and it's just sort of giving you the starting point that it's really the monolith is what let humanity go into space to find the next monolith. and then to go further into space to find the further monolith.
And I did not get that, and I think I would have to watch it twice to get it at all because
you'd have to even more than twice, you'd have to watch it twice, and then you'd have to read the book and watch the documentaries. Like I can't stress enough. It's such a visual movie that none of the story, like the literal story elements, are so obscure because there's so little dialogue concerning it. That there's really little focus on what the main point of the movie is all about the monolith, which is barely in the movie. It has it's in 5 different scenes, for a little bit.
Well, and I guess it's worth talking about that too. I did a bunch of research on this after I watched it, and Stanley Kubrick was very adamant that he wanted this to be like a piece of art, not like a movie that you watch and are told things, but something it's supposed to raise sort of surreal emotions in the viewer. And it definitely does that. For better or for worse, it does
Seriously,
that.
It does, yeah.
But okay, so we move next. The next section is the From Earth to the Moon section, as it says on this DVD. And that's where we meet the doctor, and they're going up and they're going to talk about the monolith. But really, that's not really the focus of this part. Yeah. The focus of this part is on the technology.
Yeah, in creating it, because it's your first introduction to the... And it's also got that, the really famous sequence of... I mean, this is part of, where you start understanding the pacing of this movie, where you spend, what feels like hours, where it's just following satellites and the spaceship going through space with the Blue Danube Waltz playing. It's a very famous segment of the movie
where it docks and
and all that, and everything moves. This is one of the most interesting parts of the movie, and one of the reasons I really love it, because I'm a big science guy, is that it is so precise in all the little bits of the technology, and it's space works how space works. It's not in Star Wars you have the X-wings that bank, they bank when they turn. It's what are you banking through? There's no air in space. That doesn't even make sense. It's it understands that space is a vacuum, that there's no air, that you maintain your momentum. There's no drag in space for if you're moving through it. It's it understands the physics of everything that's going on. Every spaceship has a gyroscope that spins to generate an artificial gravity. All the spaceships spin.
And what's amazing is that this was made before man ever went into space.
Yeah.
How did they do that?
And
this is, I think, the point to talk about the technology, because this is where we see it all for the first time.
Yeah, it's because part of it is because Stanley Kubrick, obviously, he wanted to make a science fiction movie that was a science fiction movie. It's all focused on the science, and it's so precise. He hired actual engineers. He collaborated with Arthur C. Clarke, who was a very famous science fiction author.
And he's credited with inventing the idea of geosynchronous orbit.
Yeah, he's not only just a very famous science fiction author. Arthur C. Clarke is also a scientist. He was an engineer. He understood this kind of stuff. He was one of those science fiction authors who, he was also really heavily invested in science and understood the science behind what he was doing. And he and Stanley Kubrick both co-created the movie and the book at the same time. Which is one of the most interesting things about it, is that it's not like Arthur C. Clarke did the book and then Stanley Kubrick adapted it. They both created the movie and the book at the same time, and they both kind of went in different directions, and then the book eventually had sequels, and they made a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey, 2010, the year we make Contact. I haven't seen it. It's not the...
I don't think you can really call it a sequel.
It's not. I'm sure it's nothing like 2001: A Space Odyssey. You couldn't make a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
You would have to resurrect Stanley Kubrick and get him to do it, which he wouldn't.
It's fuck off.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other bits of technology.
There's this thing where they have, he's the doctor's in the, almost like a sort of a... it's he's in a space shuttle, but it's he's only a passenger on it, and they have the woman who's walking through, and she's got Velcro grip boots.
Yeah.
So it's she sticks to the bottom, and there's this whole sequence where his pin slowly floats. Everything in this movie is slow. Yes. I can't stress it enough, this movie has the slowest pacing of anything ever. It's literally a 10-minute sequence where it's you're walking through, the thing kind of spins, and she kind of walks around, and this pin sort of floats out of his pocket really slowly, and she goes and grabs it and puts it back. It's everything is so deliberate and slow and meticulous, and it's just it's not even it feels like it's, if a different movie, it would be building tension, but it's not even trying to build tension. It's just showing you what's happening.
The process.
Yeah.
And I think, so there's lots of little pieces of technology like that. The one that got me, because no other science fiction movie I've ever seen get this right, from that period at least, is flat screen televisions.
Yeah, flat screen and
widescreen. They had that too. And only in a couple scenes. A lot of the screens are still 4:3
Mm-hmm.
and showing sort of low resolution video. So they didn't get that right. But
Well,
just the idea
they
of,
can't show high definition
Right.
because it hadn't been
but
invented.
right, but I'm saying the whole idea of just the flat screen itself.
Well, I mean, there's
If
something.
you go into Blade Runner has rounded TVs with like very bad like pixelated text and stuff because they didn't even predict that.
Yeah, I mean, and what's even more fascinating is later on when you get to the astronaut ship going to Jupiter. It's very small, like it's very hard to spot, but it's in the background. One of like the one scientist or the one astronaut that gets killed is playing around with what looks exactly like an iPad. Like it's got like a touchscreen thing. It's like basically just a screen that he holds. It's just kind of like playing around with it. It's like that is an iPad. Like that is literally he's playing with an iPad. What the fuck?
Steve Jobs hadn't even started building computers
Yeah,
yet, you know? It's like
this was just like some of the stuff in the movie is so. I mean, and honestly, like the science behind it, it's like if at 1968, if we had continued going on the direction we were with like investing as much in space as we had when we went to the moon, we would be there. We would be in 2001. I mean, there's a lot of politics behind why we didn't continue. Because this is another one reason I like the movie so much. Is I'm also really I'm really interested in the idea of space and going into space as like a scientific endeavor. And if we had continued going on that trajectory, we would be where we would be in 2001: A Space Odyssey. We would have a dedicated space station. We would have people casually going out into space. Like, I mean, it wouldn't just be like every like person can go into space, but it's like you have like a significant businessman going out into space to like investigating this sort of situation on the moon. We could have I mean, HAL is the most unrealistic piece, but it's like possibly just so that we could create a space station that could go to Jupiter.
But I think even with Hal, it's somewhat intentional that he's not completely realistic because you're getting into the surreal part of the movie.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, as it goes further and further, it gets more surreal and more kind of into the monolithic world.
And I think one of the things that disappointed me a little bit is there's still some parts of it, and of course this isn't the movie's fault, but it's interesting where they are still rooted in certain '60s ideas, like the furniture and the fashion. That's still very much rooted in '60s. Like they have those giant red chairs, and they wear very sort of garish clothing and stuff. And then gender roles too. It's the women have nothing to do in this world, and they're still stewardesses, and like the men are in charge of everything. And so those are sorts of things.
While it has a more optimistic vision in sort of we would dedicate more to going into space, it has a more pessimistic vision of like, we wouldn't have evolved the gender roles. We would be more militaristic in the sense that we would have like the nuclear weapons delivery systems out in space.
Yeah.
That like we would be more technologically advanced, but that has its benefits and also has its negative consequences.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that part of the movie, there's not a whole lot to talk about except that they find the monolith.
That is the slowest section of the movie because it's a long section of the movie, but most of it is spin up just like going through space and listening to waltz music.
Yes, because I guess the part that tried my patience in this section, and again, I've only seen it once, so don't take, it's an initial opinion, but they have to do the whole Blue Danube docking sequence just when they get to the station. Then they have to do it again when he goes to the moon, and it's basically the same sequence, except they're docking in a different place. Mm-hmm. So it's those sorts of things where it's like, they really like this technology, but the effects are amazing, and the cinematography, I don't know how they moved the camera like that. I don't know.
The special effects in this movie are... I will stand by this till the day I die. These are the best special effects in any movie I've ever seen. Like, this is to me evidence why digital effects don't work for most of the stuff people use digital effects for, because those models are so precise.
Yes.
And so...
They don't look like models.
They don't look like models. It's like the effects in Star Wars was actually made later, but it's like the effects in Star Wars made to like the nth degree. It's like the pinnacle to me of like model works and even just like building sets and that kind of thing. And
using the camera to help create the effect, because a lot of it is like when they're going around the circular space station in the Jupiter section, it's just that the way, I don't know how they move the camera this way, but it's like going and it's like the camera's rounding. And it's sort of stuff is coming into the film at sort of an angle and sort of.
Well, I know how they did that.
How did they do it?
They built a gyroscope. That set was a round set that spun.
Oh my god!
They built that's one of the things that's amazing when you look at behind the scenes. They built a fucking moving gyroscope, and the actors had to like walk around it and act. It's like I forget how. They did, like, there was, like, something where I think the guy had to be, like, hanging upside down, basically, but they had, like, the thing where he had to, like, kind of, like, jog to keep up with it spinning so that, like, to make it so like to create the illusion that he was going around. It was like it's just so amazing to see that like set in particular. It's like this big set that spins.
Then here's a good question. Given how sort of weird and non-commercial the film is, how did Kubrick get the funding to do that?
Because it's fucking Stanley Kubrick. I mean,
but
he could have fucking like. I mean, if Stanley Kubrick came up to you and was like, "I'm going to make a movie, and I want you to give me money to make it," you're not going to say no.
But was he Stanley Kubrick the legend at this point in his
career? It doesn't matter. No, it's Stanley Kubrick the genius who will like drive people to like the greatest extremes to do what they need to get the movie he wants. Like Stanley, everything I've like read about Stanley Kubrick, it's like if you got in Stanley Kubrick's way, that is a bad place to be.
I love all the stories about how he made Scatman Crothers cry in The Shining, and like he drove the wife in The Shining crazy for like a week, and like she had to go on antidepressants.
Yeah, there's like with
Shelley Duvall.
Yeah, but with Dr. Strangelove, there's all the stuff with like George C. Scott.
He pissed him off so much.
Everyone thought that Dr. Strangelove was going to be a straight movie. Like, the people, like, I mean, George C. Scott thought that when they were making it. He didn't realize it was going to be a comedy. Stanley Kubrick decided it was going to be a comedy, like, right before they started making the movie. And he tricked George C. Scott into acting really over the top by saying that they were going to do a warm-up take and just do as ridiculous as you can, and I'm not going to use the footage. And then he used all the footage and pissed George C. Scott off. But there's also a bunch of great stories about how George C. Scott was apparently he was a really good chess player, but he never beat Stanley Kubrick at chess, and they would play it all the time on the set. It's like awesome. Stanley Kubrick, he's just like an amazing person to look into because he's just like he seems like kind of like Orson Welles. It's like he seems like he's a legitimate like genius.
Yeah,
he's like decides that he's just going to make movies and he just makes these incredible movies.
Okay, so the next section is the Jupiter mission, the HAL 9000 section. This, to me, feels like the clearest one where you could cut it out and make it just a standalone short film, but it's obviously stronger in context. Mm-hmm. This is the iconic... We probably don't need to spend as much time on this because everyone knows this section. I knew this inside and out, and I'd never seen the movie. I just knew the steps of it. I knew Hal's voice.
The one thing you didn't know is the 20 minutes of Dave breathing in space.
Yes.
Where it's like, that's actually really creepy, that section.
It's great.
I mean, literally, like, the second half of that section of the movie is, like, Dave breathing is in the soundtrack for the entire time.
It is.
Because he's in his spacesuit.
We actually studied some of those scenes, so I'd seen a little bit of it before in film class when we studied sound design.
And when you saw those little bits, you had no idea what the whole movie was like from those little bits, did you?
But I mean, so basically, it's a shorter section than you think, because really what it is...
Because it's so famous.
Yeah. They have to go out once to get the thing on the satellite, bring it back. They find out it's not actually broken. They have the discussion. Hal reads their lips. We go to intermission. We come back. They go put it back. He's lost. They have to rescue him. They come back. He disconnects Hal. It's very It's very simple.
Yeah.
But it's all about, again, the process there. And then
like the slow development of you seeing that Hal's not what you think he is, and that he's kind of malfunctioning, and that he has like the secret orders.
This was definitely my favorite part of the movie, and the part where I felt most riveted to it. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but, I mean, I don't know. We probably have to start by talking about Hal. He's the famous part of the... What can we say that hasn't been said?
I mean, yeah, he's the progenitor of that character stereotype in science fiction that's so prevalent nowadays.
Did you see Prometheus?
Yes.
Yeah, he's
he's basically David, yeah.
Michael Fassbender definitely, who's brilliant in Prometheus.
Yeah, he was the best part of that movie.
Yeah. What did you think of it, by the way?
I didn't like that much. I thought the movie completely fell apart after the second half, or after the first half. But.
Okay.
But
that's fair. That's against the point. But yeah.
But yeah, that character totally takes a lot of the mannerisms, like the very cool way of talking, the very collected way, but like slightly menacing at certain points where you can kind of see there's a little bit of emotion there. And that enough emotion is kind of like sparks into like this sort of almost insanity, where it does like things that don't quite make sense that obviously shouldn't be doing.
And I think, this is by now a very, very worn-out theme of, will technology go to hurt humans and stuff? But in 2001, I think the subtlety with which it's done, and the fact that there's no easy answers given, it means it still has impact.
Because, I have my own interpretations of, like, how and why Hal malfunctions, but it's like you can look at that process in so many different ways. Like, it's not black and white, where it's like, say... I love Isaac Asimov, but his scenarios in his, like... iRobot short stories, not like the Will Smith thing, but his actual short stories, which are all just like looking at solving the problem of how do you make an artificial intelligence that won't betray you, and he comes up with like the laws of robotics and all that stuff. All of his stories are very simplistic of looking at how these laws contradict each other, and so it's like you would understand, okay, this robot malfunctions because it can't preserve itself and like kill someone at the same time, and these laws interact with each other and causes malfunction. With Hal, you don't quite know. Like, he's been given secret orders that, like, what you're really going to is to investigate this electromagnetic disturbance that we suspect is another monolith, like what we found on the moon. And Hal's the only one that knows that, and Hal's the only one that's going to investigate that. And he has those secret orders, and he doesn't know how to reconcile that with, like, being honest with the crew. And you get this feeling that Hal has developed, like, honest relationships. Like, Hal has developed an actual personality that likes these people, but he can't reconcile it with, like, what he's supposed to do.
You know, he's very visibly hurt by them talking about destroying him, because he can't understand why they would do that.
Yeah. And it's just, it's very, I mean, Hal is, it's like all the stuff in this movie is very subtle and downplayed, but Hal is a very complex character, and he's one of the best, I mean, he's the first, but he's one of the best versions of that archetype there is, because they don't go so far into details that it just, like, explains too much about why Hal malfunctions.
Yeah. So, this is the only section of the movie that actually has what I would call characters, too.
Yeah, I mean, the characters of Dave and the other scientist.
Frank, but Frank's not really a character.
He's like in there for a little.
Does Frank die when he goes in?
He will die. I mean, because he gets ejected out and he gets, like, launched out into space and they can't find him. So it's like he's out somewhere. Like,
no, they go and get him.
No, do they?
Yeah,
I thought,
it's like 20 fucking minutes.
He's
okay.
I thought they lost him again, but no, but he's definitely dead. Dave's
the last one, because they also Cal kills all the people in the pods.
Yeah, Cal kills all the scientists that are in cryostasis. There's also this great another, like, thing about the very meticulousness and, like, the scenes. It's like, well, one, he has Dave gets into, like, this little pod to go out. It's like that pod. If you, like, just pause the movie and, like, look at the stuff in the pod, it's so detailed.
Yeah, I know.
It's like he had NASA engineers design the interior of the pod to, like, actual, like, specifications of, like, if we could do something like this is what it would look like. So it's like, if we had, like, a pod to, like, do short range missions around a space shuttle, that's what it would have looked like.
Yeah.
Using, like, our space technology, like, branching up from, like, 1968. It's just like, and there's this also great moment where when Dave is going to get back into the space shuttle, and Hal's, like, blocked off the doors, he uses the difference in pressure between the vacuum and the airlock and, like, the atmosphere in the shuttle, and he like kind of opens the door and he uses the pressure in the vacuum. You expect there to be, like, a big bang or something, and he just, like, it's completely silent, and you just see the air pressure pushing towards the door so he can open the latch, and it's like this great moment.
It is. And it's the first time where we cut sound out of the movie.
Yeah,
and you don't hear breathing
you don't
or
have
anything.
Any soundtrack. You don't have any of the breathing or anything. It's just like you're in the vacuum and there's no sound in the vacuum at all.
Yeah, really interesting. Is there anything else? I mean, is there anything else we want to say about this section?
There's so much.
I guess the performances are good, and I had one question. You talked about humanity evolving, and that this is after their second encounter with the monolith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the people on this ship are so calm and collected all the time? I mean, Dave gets a little flustered when he has to undo Hal, but he's still very much calm and collected.
Yeah.
And do you think that's anything that might be a human evolutionary trait that came from another encounter with the monolith?
That could be. I also kind of interpreted that, like, Hal himself kind of comes about because of the seconds, because he's an artificial person that's very flawed because we're not yet to the pinnacle, and he's, like, kind of like what humanity at the time would think is the pinnacle, like, because Hal is, like, super intelligent because he has access to all this information. He can see anywhere on the ship. It's like, I mean, Hal, you would think, is, like, the best thing you could be. He has no emotion to cloud his judgments. But all that stuff ultimately means that he has no means of reconciling contradictions or of, like, reconciling if he does develop emotions. And so I think it's, like, a sign of our not yet concluded evolution to, like, the next step in our, like, ideas of, like, this is what we're kind of trying to be, but we can't really quite make it yet with Hal.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's talk about the most interesting part of the movie. This
the
is
acid trip.
Yes. This is the Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite section. And it's 20 minutes of pure 100% avant-garde filmmaking.
I mean, yeah. Well, Dave.
It's all visual association. It's,
Dave gets to Jupiter, and then a laser light show happens.
Yes.
And it's actually really fucking creepy because actually we haven't mentioned this yet, but like what I love what they do with the monolith every time they counter the monolith and it gets like closer to it. There's like this really creepy like sort of theme of like
it's a great musical theme.
I mean, it's kind of like it's got so many elements. It's got this kind of like high pitched wail and this like low sort of like almost like occultish like moaning and like kind of like almost chanting sort of thing. It's like this really creepy and it's just great how it builds up in volume as you get closer and closer to the monolith each time you encounter it. And it has a similar thing in this section and it's just like this really unsettling theme and they have all this stuff where it's like it's a laser light show. It's just like trippy colors coming at you all the time, like interspersed with footage of like Dave's like eye or like his like face like just like kind of freaking out. It's like and it's just this really fucking surreal experience. And it's like what's the weirdest part about it is how long it goes on. Like you expect it to be like
it's at least 10 minutes.
Yeah, you expect it to be like, okay, this couldn't possibly last more than like 2 to 3 minutes. It's like a 10-minute section of the movie.
There eventually we're seeing like canyons and
you're getting it gets like even more like strange where it's like kind of like negative footage with like or like colors inversed of like almost like what looks like a Martian like surface or something like that. It's like you can't describe it. It's such a bizarre sequence, and it goes on for a really long amount of time.
And so then Dave is suddenly in this room. Well, he's in the pod, and he sees this white, perfect room, and he sees himself as an older man out there. Then he becomes the older man. Then he sees another older man eating. Then he becomes that older man. Then he sees the older man in bed. Then he becomes that older man, sees the monolith, becomes the fetus in space, and the movie ends.
Yeah. But it's like, but I also love this section of the movie because the set they build is so cool looking.
It is.
Because it's like if an alien had like some small idea of like what Earth culture was like and tried to build a room. It's like, because it's got like this almost like Victorian era furniture with like this big bed and like this dining room. It's got a bathroom, but it's like this stark white room with like these bright lights and it's just like really bright and shocking and like, it's almost like you would imagine like living there would be really traumatizing because it's just so bright all the time and everything is just white and stark and plain except for the Victorian furniture, which like seems really out of place. And it's like kind of like a zoo exhibit for a human almost.
Yeah. So this discussion's going on forever, but
how
would you like succinctly sum up this section of the movie thematically?
I mean, it's about kind of approaching a level of like almost like a level of consciousness that human mankind can't understand because he's after this point I interpret it he's like kind of like a higher dimension or something like that. He's in the realm of the monolith or whatever created the monolith, and it's like he's experiencing like time in a distorted fashion. He's almost like accelerated evolution in a way where he's like transcending into a different thing, and it's just like it's one of the things I like about it is that they have alien. I mean, it's like obviously the monolith is like this alien artifact, but you never see like what actually made it. You don't know if the monolith itself is like intelligent in some way. You don't know it's like did something make it, and they never show like an alien or anything like that because you couldn't make put an alien on screen and make it look convincing because you would have no frame of reference for understanding what an alien would actually look at.
I read in some of the bonus materials that Kubrick originally thought about having literal aliens do the monolith's part, but he talked to Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
And Sagan told them aliens would not be humanoid, and that's the only thing we can do. And so that's when they came up with the monolith.
Yeah, because I mean, there's just one of the things I just love about science is that you have this idea of like aliens are going to be like these tentacle monsters or whatever, but we like human beings share a majority of DNA with like every single life form on Earth because we all kind of come from the same place. So it's like you have a jellyfish in a human being. We share a majority of the DNA with a jellyfish. So it's like that's how diverse the life can be on Earth, and having that much similarity in the like the building blocks of life. It's like you'd have no frame of reference whatsoever for an alien life form.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I also like about it. It's like once it approaches an area where we would have no way of understanding it, it doesn't try to like fake it. It like leaves it really ambiguous and mysterious, and you don't understand what's going on.
I just assumed, the monolith is a being of energy, and that's how we're seeing it in this very stark black form, because maybe that's all we can perceive.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, like, you could see that it exists on, like, in, like, a fourth dimensional or, like, fifth dimensional sense, and you only see the three-dimensional, like, part of it. Like, there's so many ways you can interpret what happens in this movie. But there's one thing, like, the last thought I have to say about why this movie why I really love it, why it's so weird, and why I wouldn't blame someone who wouldn't like it, is the pacing of the movie. Like we said before, it's so slow. Like, I can't say that enough. It's the slowest pacing of any movie you will ever see, where you will literally watch 10 minutes of a guy breathing through a spacesuit in space.
Yeah.
And that will be 10 minutes of the movie, and you'll have multiple sections like that. And it's just like the movie, at least to me, puts you in this really weird state of mind, where it's like, once I'm done watching 2001: A Space Odyssey, I feel like my sense of time is almost distorted. Like, I feel like I just spent a week doing something. Like, I step away from it, it's like, what the fuck did I just do? Like, what, like, where have I, like, what time is it? Like, what day is it? It's like, it just has this really weird effect that, like, I find really fascinating and interesting. And I don't think a lot of people experience it like that. Like, they can't, or they just can't get to the point in the movie where they would feel like that.
And I'll say this about watching it. I don't know if I liked it yet, and I think that's exactly what you expected me to say.
Yeah. You have to be insane to say that you, love the movie the first time you watch it.
Right.
And I didn't like it the first time I watched it. I decided to watch it again later.
And I guess one of the things I would say is, though, I'm distanced from it for a lot of the same reasons I feel distanced from a lot of Kubrick's work. And this doesn't diminish my respect or admiration for his work at all. It's just a personal taste thing. Is that I do have sort of such a need for really compelling and sort of vivid characters, and that's not always Kubrick's focus, at least not on an emotional connection level.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why Full Metal Jacket has always been my favorite of his, because I feel...
because it's all about the characters. It's all about Joker. Yeah.
Yeah. And but even in movies that are very much focused on sort of the human form, like The Shining, you're not trying to get to know those people. That's not the focus of the movie. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just like, it distances me personally. And but I think 2001, I respect the hell out of it. It's an amazing work of art, and just every frame of it was fascinating to study and watch. And hopefully I would like to see it again. And I was talking to Sean about this. I would like to see it in a theater where I'm not distracted by anything else, where I can just sit and watch it and sort of absorb it.
Yeah.
Because on DVD it's a little harder, I think.
Yeah, because it's such a visual experience. I mean, it's entirely a visual experience. There's so little dialogue, and even a lot of the dialogue you do hear, especially in the Moon section, is in the background. It's really muddled, and you can't really make sense of it.
So
2001: A Space Odyssey is an interesting experience. And
yes.
It's one of my favorite movies.
As for availability, there's 50 different fucking DVDs, and it's on Netflix. So we're going on to the next one.
Yeah, I feel like we just watched 2001: A Space Odyssey. I feel like we've been here for a week.
I know. Okay.
Such a strange movie.
What the fuck number were we on? That was your number 4, right?
I think so.
Yes, that was your number 4. My number 4 is Battle Royale. This is the final film by sort of famous Japanese director Kinji Fukasaku from the year 2000, and it's hard to describe how and why I love Battle Royale so much. I mean, I can definitely do it. But as a film critic, one of the reasons, I write about film and talk about film is I like to publicize movies that I feel are important and special, and try to get people to see those. And Battle Royale, probably more than any movie I've ever seen, I've really tried hard to beat the drum for and get people to see. Because I think it's really an underrated masterpiece. Underrated in the sense that there's a controversy around it because of its subject matter that I think is unfair, and it's distanced a lot of people from the movie without ever seeing it, until they remade it as The Hunger Games in North America, and suddenly kids killing kids was just fine. But that's a whole other discussion that
you've gone into at great length.
That I've gotten flamed for from every side, because how dare I suggest that The Hunger Games could be even slightly derivative.
You're starting to kind of understand what it was like growing up and not liking Harry Potter.
Imagine
you were in middle school or high school and everyone loved that book, and you're like,
I just read it in Japanese!
It's like, I don't particularly like it that much.
Okay. Anyway, Battle Royale is the movie version is a little different than the book, so we'll just talk about the movie. It's set in a sort of dystopian present, is the best way to describe that, where it's an alternate sort of history.
Dystopian alternate reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
a dystopian present.
But I mean...
That would imply that right now we're in a dystopia, which you could argue for, but it's not the same thing.
And anyway, so the world is largely the same, except that the Japanese government in this film is much more, it's much more like a monarchy. It's much more militaristic than it is in real-life Japan. And there would have been in the movie a series of student rebellions. And to quell this, every year they put on Battle Royale, which is where they take a class of 42 high school students, because that's sort of the class system in this version of Japan, is there's 42 students. They've been with each other since they were little kids, and they've always been the same class. And they are put on like a little island, and where sort of a confined space.
Where they find a hatch, and they have to put in a number sequence, and there's polar bears. It's really bizarre.
It's not that kind of island. And it's like an inhabited island. They've just taken the people off of it, and they are...
So it's an uninhabited island.
Yes. They're each given... Well, it's got houses and stuff. That's my point. They're each given a weapon, and they are told...
It's an inhabited island, but they took the people off it.
I didn't...
That just sounds really funny to me.
Okay. Starting over again.
Okay.
42 high school students.
42 high school students.
They're taken to a secure location.
In a secure location. A fight to the death. Who will win?
Battle Royale's great. Sean, what's your number 3? Because I'm obviously not going to get to talk about the movie.
Okay, you can talk about it. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks. 42 high school students. They're taken to a secure location. It's not publicized or sort of... It's not a reality TV contest like the Hunger Games or anything, but they are each given a weapon and some supplies, and they have to kill each other until one is left. And... it's a premise where every time...
Will they, kill all of them if they decide not to kill each other? Okay.
Yes. They have... I think in the movie the timeline is 3 days. If there's more than one survivor in 72 hours, they all die.
That sucks.
Yeah. They have these things around their necks, these sort of neck bands that will explode and chop their heads off, basically, as we see in the first scene of the movie, when one of the kids rebels. And so Battle Royale, when I describe that premise to people... they're horrified that I like this, and they think, why would anyone write that? Why would anyone watch that or anything? Again, I think it's become
they clearly have never seen some of the more fucked up movies
I know,
in the world.
that's my point.
It's not, it's like a really dark, grim, premise, but it's not like that's totally unreasonable, against what it means to be human or something. It's not like a Satanist plot or something.
And this movie, I read the book first, and then I saw the movie. And I saw the movie back when you could not get it in America at all. You had to, and not even it was hard to pirate stuff back then. You had to buy a DVD,
get a boat,
get a bootleg on
a parrot, get on the seven seas.
Get a bootleg on eBay. But this is going to take us 5 hours if you don't just shut up and let me talk about the fucking movie.
I'm trying to put some jokes in, for the people who want a bit more humor in the podcast.
Okay, can I please just get through my initial analysis of Battle Royale, and then when we get into the larger discussion, you can joke about it all you want.
It's if I Jonathan, you should understand at this point, if I find an opportunity to make a joke that I think is funny to me, I take that opportunity. It's not my fault. It's it's part of who I am as a person.
Okay. We've been talking about Battle Royale for 5 minutes, and I think I've been talking about Battle Royale for 10 seconds of that.
Probably.
Okay. Anyway, Battle Royale, in the original book form, it's a great book, and I recommend it, but the movie is a vast improvement because Kinji Fukasaku took it and saw something very personal in the story that he related to his own life and childhood and his thoughts that he'd been exploring his whole life about the way adults relate to children, and that's what Battle Royale is about. Sort of the famous story that's told on every DVD copy you can get of Battle Royale is that Kinji Fukasaku, when he was a 15-year-old, World War II was happening, and he was drafted like the rest of his class and forced to make arms in a weapons factory. And the factory was firebombed.
Jeez.
And most of his friends died. He had to duck under dead bodies for cover. And then when the firebombing was over, he was told to drag all the dead bodies of his best friends away and bury them.
See, if you started with that, I wouldn't have made any jokes.
Okay, thanks. That's what Battle Royale is about.
Okay.
It's about him processing the emotions he'd been struggling with since he was 15. And so that's what it's about, is he walked away from that scenario with this burning hatred of adults, because it was adults that started the war, it was adults that forced him to do that, and it was adults that killed all his friends. And he had to live with that his whole life. And Battle Royale is a very heightened sort of metaphorical allegory for those emotions. And it's about the communication gap between adults and children, because at its heart, the Japanese government has done this because they don't understand youth. And that's a problem we see in every society over and over again, is a fundamental misunderstanding between adults and children, and how that can result in, really harmful things. And Battle Royale is just this very large-scale allegory for that, where because the adults don't understand it, they're getting rid of the children in the most gruesome way they can. And so that's really what the movie's about. thematically, and there's so many things we can talk about with it, but I don't want to spoil it, and I think I would have to spoil it to tell you my ultimate sort of interpretation and analysis of the movie and its ending and everything. But why it is my fourth favorite movie of all time, and it could be higher on another version of this list because it is such an amazing movie, is it's 42 high school students, and while the book lets you get to know most of those kids, the movie focuses on fewer, but still, the performances of those kids is out of this world. It is the best young acting I have ever seen. Almost every person in the movie was actually 15 at the time of filming. Most had never acted before. And Kinji Fukasaku got not just good, but like great performances out of all of them. It is an amazing ensemble, and they do amazing work. There's only one significant adult performer in the movie, and that's Takeshi Kitano, who's a famous director, but also he acts in his own movies and he acts in this as the character Kitano. They named him after the actor because the actor's so iconic, and he's sort of the leader he's their teacher who leads the program and has betrayed them and is giving them to this. And we'll talk about him in a second because it's a great performance. But the kids themselves, so many great characters you get invested in, and you get invested in them and you have to watch them die. And it's not the cheat version of this movie where they all get together and live. I don't want to spoil the ending, but it's not like...
Yeah, I mean, starting with that premise, it's not like, everyone's not coming out of that alive. It's like Seven Samurai, people are going to die.
And so you have to watch that. And even the characters who are sort of horrible, like there's this character, Mitsuko, who is sort of the female sort of antagonist force, but there's really no antagonist because they've been forced into this. Yeah. Someone would do that. They would get into killing. And she's fascinating, and the actress who plays her is so good as this girl who was always an outcast in sort of the high school system and has found that she's good at something, and what she's good at is killing and manipulating, but she finally feels like she fits in this society, and it's fascinating. And it's none of the kids get a whole lot of screen time because there's so many to do, but the performances suggest so much, and that's really interesting. And the real antagonist of the battle is this kid Kazuo Kiriyama, who's sort of a psychopath who's been put in by the adults, and that's sort of a good way they get around having to deal with sort of like good and evil. Is he can be evil because he's not actually from their class. And sort of a smart shorthand they do there. But everyone else, I mean, it's a lot of shades of gray. It's a lot of great sequences. In addition to the story I told about Kinji Fukasaku and how personal this work was to him, it's also very much about analyzing high school social structures and how children and teenagers interact. And we see who these teenagers are when they're pushed to the brink here. And that's a very common storytelling thing, is when you push a character to the brink, you see who they are. Mm-hmm. And that's what this movie does so well. There's probably the most iconic scene in terms of the killings is there's a sequence in a lighthouse where 5 girls who are best friends have gotten together. And I'm going to spoil this scene here because I have to talk about it. If you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to, skip ahead a little bit. But basically, they trust each other, they've gotten together, they're determined they're not going to kill each other, and they're going to find a way to escape. And one little thing happens that sets them off, and the 5 wind up killing each other. And as you watch that scene go down, and it's a really short scene, but it feels very long because so much happens in it. But it's an amazing sequence, and it feels completely earned, the slaughter there. And it's such a fascinating movie for those reasons. The main characters, who is sort of a 3-person trio of this Shuya Nanahara, Noriko Nakagawa, and Shogo Kawada. And Shogo is played by a slightly older actor because he's sort of like been held back. He's sort of the man with no name sort of character in this movie. And that kid does a great sort of Western hero performance.
Does he squint a lot?
Yes, actually.
Good.
It's good. He's got a bandana on his head. Then he takes it off and he's got a big scar.
Nice.
And because Shogo is a survivor of a previous battle royale who's been put back in the mix. And
that sucks for him.
Yeah, that just sucks for him.
Like, I thought I was through this shit.
Yep. So, lots of great characters. It's got one of the best pacings of any movie I've ever seen. When we talked about Star Wars in the previous podcast, it's that same kind of thing. There's no meat on this thing.
Yeah.
Or, there's a lot of meat. There's no fat on it. It's just...
You keep on making that mistake.
I keep making that mistake, I know. There's a lot of meat to this movie, not fat is what I'm saying. It's like...
all bone.
Yeah. You sit down and watch it, and it just barrels along, and you cannot look away. It is gripping in every sense of the word. There are 2 cuts of the movie, and that's important to note. There's the original theatrical cut, and then a year later, Kinji Fukasaku, that's the last thing he did before he died, is he put together his director's cut and re-released it into theaters. And it's got... The main difference is a 5-minute extended ending where the movie ends and then it goes on for another 5 minutes. And it's a really good ending, and I think it's central to the theme of the movie, because if you don't have it, you can't quite understand what he's trying to say with the ending. Or it's a much more simplistic ending.
That kind of sounds like A Clockwork Orange has something very similar, where it's like actually the version that most people know is like one chapter short, and there's like this epilogue chapter that's like essential to understanding the movie.
Yeah. Or you just come away with a much simpler.
Yeah, it's like you don't. It's like there's something that's like there's just like one little thing that needs to be turned for like the theme to come full circle.
And that's what the director's cut does. The director's cut, though, because of some changes they put here and there, it isn't quite as relentlessly paced. So I would recommend, if you see it, watch both. Start with the theatrical cut and then watch the director's cut. This is another one you might have to watch twice to really make up your mind on, because it is, if you are not used to sort of extreme cinema, it is extreme. It's very violent. It's all kids, which makes it hard to watch. It's very emotionally heavy.
But they're teenagers who are really annoying, so it's not... I mean, if they were like 12-year-olds, it's like, oh my god. 15-year-olds? Fucking kill them. Annoying little shits.
But great movie, and the best part may be Takeshi Kitano. It's one of my all-time favorite performances. He's so good in this as this man who is clearly demented, and he's relishing these kids all killing each other, but at the same time, they make him into a character himself as someone where you start sympathizing with him and seeing, or maybe empathizing is the better word, seeing why he would go to these lengths and how he fits into this world, and how there's this sadness to his performance because he really does mourn for where the world has gone. And he's trying to fix it in his own really fucked up way, and it's just a brilliant performance, and he also provides the moments of comic relief that the movie probably needs to play.
Like that. I wasn't expecting to hear comic relief.
No. There's not a lot of it in the movie, unless... I saw it with...
It's like one of the kids' parents doesn't come up and they like accidentally find weed and don't understand it's weed, and they start like smoking it, and it's like, oh, it's so wacky.
He's referencing Transformers 2, which you should never watch.
Don't. I mean, we have an old podcast about Transformers that you can go listen to if you want.
Yes. So anyway, Battle Royale is great. I really love it. Have you ever seen it, Sean?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
You've
it would be difficult for you to see it, though, because
it's not an easy movie to have that much access to.
But that's what I was going to say, is we do need to talk about availability with this, because if we had been talking about this even 6 months ago, I would have to tell you to pirate it or buy a bootleg DVD on eBay, because that's the closest you could get to finding it, because it was just never released in America for obvious reasons. It came out a year after Columbine. They weren't going to... They weren't going to...
That throws like a wrench into the works.
Yeah. But Anchor Bay finally this year, because the Hunger Games came out and made the idea of kids killing kids popular again, they decided to use that as free publicity for Battle Royale, and they finally released it on DVD and Blu-ray in the United States. There's a few configurations. You can either buy just the director's cut of Battle Royale on its own on DVD or Blu-ray, and I totally recommend it. That's a good release if you just a good starting point. Or you can get, which is what I have here, the complete collection, which is a 4-disc set, which has the theatrical cut, the extended cut, a disc of bonus features for Battle Royale, and the sequel, Battle Royale 2, which is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It is like incredibly awful. It was directed by...
It's like, I don't quite understand how you could have a complete collection of one movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the sequel's awful. You should buy the complete collection and have both cuts and the bonus features.
Yeah.
But don't watch the sequel. It's, oh my god, it's one of the, Battle Royale is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, it's like you describing that's not a premise. That would be like having a sequel to A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
It's like you can't, or a sequel to 2001: Space Odyssey in like the same style. It's like you can't make a sequel.
And it wasn't Kinji Fukasaku died, so his son did it, and it's just terribly made. It's awful. So don't see it. But Battle Royale, great movie.
So really buy the complete collection and just use the sequel as a coaster, maybe?
Yes.
Or like as a frisbee?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, it's, I think we're looking at this. It's got some nice artwork on the set, and then
I like how it's kind of like constructed like a book.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And then you can, it's a nice disc you could use as a coaster.
Yeah, it's got a nice design to it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's Battle Royale. I highly recommend it, but not for the faint of heart. And it's another one where if you didn't like it, like you just couldn't take it, I can understand for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So, but let's hear about your number 3 choice, Sean.
Okay, what is my number 3 choice? Aha! It is, oh yes, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, once again. This is, if you listen to the last podcast, Jonathan on his list had the first Star Wars, which he just called Star Wars, but now it's Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope.
I just like calling it Star Wars because that's how I grew up with it. It was just called Star Wars.
What? No, I'm sure on your VHS box set, is it just called Star Wars?
Yeah, they're all just called. Yeah, this one's just Star Wars.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, and you just pull it out. It doesn't say A New Hope anywhere on it.
But anyways, I totally understand why you would put the original in above Empire Strikes Back, but for me, I knew I had to have a Star Wars movie because I mean, it's Star Wars is just a huge part of my life. I mean, we had a whole Star Wars podcast. I love the video games, I love the comic books, the novels. Like, I love the expanded fiction. I love just the universe itself. But if I had to pick the one movie that's my favorite and the one just I love the most, it has to be Empire Strikes Back, because I think it expands and like kind of defines what the Star Wars universe is, where the Star Wars universe is introduced in the original movie. But then in the sequel, they kind of get more into what is the Force. It like kind of develops these characters. It's like you kind of get a better look at the Empire, a better look at like where the rebellion is now, and just all the sort of stuff with Yoda and Luke on Dagobah and his training, and you really get to understand what a Jedi is, what it means to be a Jedi, what it means to like fall to the dark side of the Force, and those elements of the universe that I just love, the more fantastical elements as opposed to the science fiction-y elements, are just so engrossing in this movie. And I feel the cinematography is improved. There's so many.
Oh, Irvin Kershner hit this out of the park.
Yeah, there's like so many shots in the movie that are just so incredible, and the sets like Dagobah just looks so cool. Cloud City, it's just amazing. Like Hoth, all the sets are just so cool and detailed, and you can just stare at them for hours because they're just so beautiful looking. And I mean, obviously, spoilers for Star Wars Episode 5 if you haven't seen it yet or you don't know the twist. It's also where you get the coolest twist in like fiction ever, where Darth Vader is revealed to be Luke's father.
And so well executed, too.
Yeah, it's just...
At the end of this long, brutal fight.
I mean, and that whole fight is just so cool. Like, just the interior of Cloud City, it's like, I'll never forget how it looks when Luke first encounters Darth Vader and they're in the not the cryo chamber, but where they carbonize the Han Solo, and they're in that, and it's like really dark with like fog kind of coming up, and there are these red lights, and Darth Vader's standing up like above on these stairs, and they turn on their lightsabers. It's just like the lightsaber itself is just like creates the coolest visual effect in cinema because of how it kind of like plays with light, and like whenever you have like a lightsaber in a dark scene, it just looks so cool. And this movie just took what I love about Star Wars and like upped it to the just like nth degree again. It's just like the Yoda character is like all the stuff from Empire Strikes Back is so iconic, particularly the Yoda character, his sort of discombobulated way of speaking, and how you come to understand what like all the philosophical elements of what he's talking about. And then you also have it's interesting how narratively it's structured into sort of two parts. You've got the Luke part where after they depart after the battle at Hoth, Luke goes on to Dagobah to learn what it means to be a Jedi, but then Han and Leia go off and they kind of learn to understand each other and like develop their relationship, which culminates when Han Solo gets freezed into carbonite. And I just find that the two different character tracks makes this for a very interesting narrative structure, because you already understand these characters from the first movie and you understand them so well, and it's interesting to see them develop in kind of different directions and then come together at the end when Luke has to go and save people.
Yeah, we talked last time when we talked about Star Wars, the first movie, that Luke is not the most dynamic character the first time around, but this is where they really go
this is where they flesh out Luke, and Luke gets to learn, like I said, gets to learn what it means to be a Jedi, gets to learn the real philosophy behind it. He goes through all the intense physical training, and he's just like, and I mean, I just love the scene where Luke is lifting the X-Wing, you're trying to lift the X-Wing out of the swamp, and he can't do anything with it. And then Yoda just goes and does it, and is like, you have to believe in what you're doing to be able to do it at all, and if you just go and say it's impossible, you're never going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's so many great little, like, Eastern philosophical elements to that whole section that I just find really interesting, and really open up that side of the universe to me.
It's fascinating. It's great, and we need to talk about Yoda, because he's the thing that makes this movie really click. And it's the most amazing effect I've ever seen in a movie.
It's such good model effect on that puppet, and just the puppetry. It's
a
seamless
performance.
Yeah, it really is. Yoda, even though he's just a puppet, Yoda gives a fully nuanced performance, obviously with Frank Oz voicing.
And I never think of it as a puppet. It just looks like the real Yoda, whatever that would be. So much more than the CGI Yoda in the prequels. Yeah,
it's another element of where you can see that CGI is, or not, the CGI is an inferior way of doing effects work if you are capable of doing it in a practical way.
Yeah.
The puppet actually exists and you're filming an actual thing on camera. And, I mean, obviously you need the performance to breathe life into it, but having the actual physical thing there makes it feel so real.
Yeah. It's amazing. And we touched upon this. I mean, I love how much Harrison Ford develops Han Solo's character. Carrie Fisher is probably underrated as Leia, but she's really good in this one. Her scenes with Han Solo are just great.
And then you've got Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian, who I love that character. Just all the little interactions between him and Han. There's just like Billy D. Williams is like the coolest guy in the world.
Yeah.
And I just love. He's like the only black guy in like all of the Star Wars universe, other than Samuel L. Jackson with the prequels, and he's got like a cape and everything. It's just so ridiculous, but he's so cool.
He's great, and I mean, just that again, it just builds to such an epic and dark and sad conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, really, once Empire ends, it's like you're really beaten down. It's like Han Solo's frozen and he's gone. Luke got his freaking hand chopped off and found out that his like arch nemesis is actually his father. It's really melodramatic, but it's just so.
Leia's lost the love of her life.
Yeah,
Chewbacca's lost his best friend. C-3PO is blown to bits.
And Lando got the Millennium Falcon back, so he's kind of doing okay.
Yeah. So, but it's a great ending, and I think, Empire Strikes Back set the tone for just about every great sequel after it.
Yeah, it really did the thing where it picks up all, like, it evolves the universe introduced in the first movie, but for some reason, like, the sequels usually take the, like, what's usually like kind of an optimistic sort of first movie, and just take it in like a really dark direction. Like Mass Effect did a really similar thing, where Mass Effect 1, it's not like happy-go-lucky, but it's not super depressing. Then Mass Effect 2, it's like you're assembling people to go on a suicide mission, and you know most of the people are going to end up dead, and you're like in the seedy underworld of the galaxy. It's like, oh, this is kind of depressing for most of it.
So, great stuff. Anything more to say about Empire Strikes Back?
I mean, it's just... Obviously, Star Wars is just such a huge thing to me. Like, the whole universe is so well fleshed out and so well defined, and such an important part of, like, my life and my, like, experience with pop culture and, like, narrative fiction. And it's really hard to choose. I mean, obviously, Return of the Jedi is not the best, but it has kind of my favorite sequence at the end between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. And the original movie, obviously, is really important in how it introduces everything, and Alec Guinness is so amazing in that one. But I think, Episode 5 is the one that I would say is the best and has the sort of the deep... It resonates with me the most with the film.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have Jake Lloyd in it, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's like, actually, I mean, I was saying that it's like, it's really between this one and Star Wars Episode 2, because I love 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I obviously love being bored out of my mind, and no movie has bored me more than Episode 2, so...
You didn't love to talk about sand?
I mean,
It gets everywhere, Sean!
Yeah, it's all over the place. I hate sand, too. I totally understand that feeling, but...
Let's talk about something I really love, and I think you love, too.
Yes.
And this is my number 3 movie of all time, no question. I cannot imagine, like, cinematic life without this. It is Back to the Future from 1985, Robert Zemeckis' time travel classic.
Right when you said that, I heard the theme in my head. Like,
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it's like right when you said Back to the Future, it's like that was playing in my mind.
This is the most purely fun movie I have ever encountered, and I can watch it as many times as I want and never get bored with it, and I know every inch of it. Like, I probably know, like, every detail of this movie better than any other. Mm-hmm. But still, every joke makes me laugh. Every, like, time Marty finally gets back to the future, or when George McFly, beats down Biff, I still, like, cheer and get really happy. I've seen it in a theater, I think, 4 times. I go every time they have it, and cheer and shout out lines and stuff. I just really love it. And this is another one where you've probably seen Back to the Future, and if you haven't, you really need to, and you can get it in a variety of configurations. I don't know if it's ever been available on its own. It's usually with the trilogy, but the sequels are fun too, so not nearly as good, but they're still fun. And, the creativity to the setup. Again, I'm a huge time travel junkie. That's my favorite kind of science fiction story. I think it gives you such limitless possibilities, and I love it when it's done well. And this is such a creative use of time travel, of just the basic idea of going back in time and seeing your parents as high schoolers. And it's not just a gimmick. They really exploit it for everything it's worth and have such fun with it. and it's such a creative structure, and it builds so well. It's another really well paced movie where it just has such great forward momentum. But again, it's the characters for me, and there's few protagonists I like as much as Marty McFly and Michael J. Fox. Bless his heart. I really wish he could still act as much as he did back then, because he's so good in this.
Yeah, and then of course Doc Brown.
Oh yeah,
is just
Christopher Lloyd is the man.
So great, because I just love how you get to see like young Doc Brown and then old Doc Brown, even though they like look like they're the same age. Like they don't even try to.
Well, on the Blu-ray, you can see some old age makeup they plastered on Doc Brown for the like present day scenes, and it's really awful. It's hilarious. But it's very little, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like I think like Back to the Future is one that I was seriously considering putting on my list. It's like didn't quite get there. Like it would probably be maybe like my number 11 spot. But one of the things I really love about Back to the Future is just like it's one of those rare movies that to me doesn't have a genre. Like it doesn't fit. It's like it's a science fiction movie kind of. And it's like it's a comedy. Kind of, but it also has like some.
It's an action movie.
Yeah, it's kind of some kind of action movie. It's like just kind of like
it's a romantic comedy.
I mean, and they were making a lot of movies like this. Feel like in the '80s, where it's like it's just got like no clear genre that you can just put it into. It's like it's its own unique product that feels like it exists on its own and just came to of its own like will and like spirit of happiness.
And that's why it feels so fulfilling when you watch it, because you get everything. For me, I get everything I could possibly want out of a movie with Back to the Future. It's so much fun, and it's even sort of insightful in how it looks at teenage culture and sort of parents and children and things like. I mean, it's not really deep, but it's got that, and it's fun. And of course, I always love the relationship between Doc and Marty and how important they are to each other, and that it's a kid and an old man, but they've got this great chemistry. And it's so much.
And then I love even more like Marty and George McFly.
Oh, it's great
from the past. That whole relationship is so great.
Crispin Glover, I don't know if he was ever good in anything else in his career, but he's so funny in this one. And God, I'm forgetting the name of the mother, the young woman who plays the mother. Oh, I guess they're the same actress, but obviously, just all the characters so great and so much fun to watch them, and the ways they play with like 50s pop culture in relation to 80s pop culture, and the skateboarding scenes, and it sort of embraces the silliness of the 80s.
Yeah,
and I love that. It doesn't try to apologize for it like a lot of movies do or try to find excuses. It sort of knows the 80s are silly, and that's why it's timeless. Like Back to the Future will never feel out of date, I don't think.
Yeah, even though it's like it really is a product of the 80s. It doesn't. Yeah, it kind of like transcends that. It's like. Yeah. It so captures that moment.
Yeah. And it's so creative. I mean, we haven't even talked about stuff like the DeLorean. I think we take that for granted now.
Yeah.
But when the first time you see this movie, isn't that just the coolest idea?
Yeah, it's like just like the design of that car is so cool and just and like all just like the crap that's heaped onto the back to make up the flux capacitor and the time travel mechanism.
So great.
Yeah, there's just like it is just like it's such an infectiously happy movie.
Yeah. And I just feel so happy while watching it, and I guess it's hard. I can't really get into it and analyze it as much as I have probably any other movie on this list. It's just a movie that makes me so happy when I watch it, and I'll go out of my way to go find a theater that's playing it if they've got a print of it, or buy the Blu-rays and watch that. And it is such a great movie. And I guess we could touch on the sequels really quick.
Yeah.
What do you think of the sequels?
I really like Back to the Future Part 2, and I also really like Back to the Future Part 3, but to me, the first one's the best, the second one's the second best, and the third one's the third best. But it's like, a lot of people don't particularly like the third one, but I really do.
I do too. I think I like the third one a little more than the second, because there's a couple. I think the second gets a little over the top at parts, but it's not bad. I love their vision of the future. We're about to reach that, and it's nothing like that, obviously, but that's another case where they did not set that far enough in the future. But
they should just do. I love the way that Mega Man does it, where Mega Man just has variables. It's like 20XX. It's like it'll be sometime in this millennium.
Yeah. So they're fun, but I mean, again, the first one is just such a perfect and like just contained movie. Like, I think a lot of people now have this vision that, they wrote the ending to the first one to be a setup for sequels, but that wasn't the case at all. They never thought they were going to make a sequel, and that's why it's one of my favorite endings, where it's this great open-ended thing where you can imagine all this adventures they'll go have. But it's a great joke that they have to go do something about their kids, and that's probably why I don't like 2 as much, is because the payoff to that isn't as good as like my imagination would make it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Back to the Future is the shit. It's awesome.
It's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, you really should.
You really should. So, Sean, let's hear about your number 2 movie of all time.
My number 2 movie is King Kong, Eighth Wonder of the World.
I love Peter Jackson.
No, it's not that King Kong. That King Kong's okay, but I'm talking about the original 1938 King Kong with old school stop motion effects.
They're so awesome.
It's such an awesome movie. It's like, I mean, this is kind of a running theme on my list, is having a lot of movies that rely, entirely on practical effects, because I really am starting to dislike the prominence of CGI in modern movie making, because a lot of it's like, it's just is really distracting and stuff you don't need to use CGI on. And King Kong is evidence that in 1938 you could make a convincing, compelling character that's not human, and it's basically just a toy that you move a little bit, shoot a frame, move a little bit, shoot a frame, move a little bit, shoot a frame.
Move the dinosaur a little bit?
Yeah. It's just, King Kong, the effects are so cool. And the movie is just, to me, I feel like, I mean, okay, granted, it's an old movie, it's 1938, the dialogue's cheesy, the acting's a little bit over the top. For some reason,
sexist in the extreme.
Yeah, it's sexist. For some reason, I don't know why, like, every male actor from, like, 1932 to like 1950 had the same fucking voice. They all sound the exact same. I don't know if like they do that intentionally or what, because I've never heard someone that sounds like that. It's like the most American sounding male voice possible. But it's like all that stuff. I like, a lot of people say this, like, that makes it a bad movie, but it's like, that's just what it is. Like, that's the style of the times. That's the aesthetic. It's like reading a comic book from the 60s. It was just a different style. It doesn't make it bad. It's just, it's a more kind of over-the-top, obvious dialogue, and I love it for it. Like, it's own, it's very campy if you look at it seriously now today, but even without that, King Kong has, as a movie, it has such an imagination to it, and it's so compelling, and it's got such a great heart of, like, adventure, and exploring the strange Skull Island that has dinosaurs and a giant ape monster, and the sort of weird pseudo-philosophy behind the ending where it's like, no, 'twas not man, it was a beauty that killed the beast, and all that stuff. It's like, King Kong is not a very deep movie. You can pull, if you want to, you can pull some deep philosophical themes from it if you really stretch it. You can really do that with any sort of narrative.
That really wasn't the point, though, I don't think.
Yeah, but that's not the point. King Kong is a movie that, I mean, it's also one of those movies that's so influential and so the first of its kind that when I watch movies like that, I feel like I can sort of feel like how it was when that was the first. Like, that's the first time someone had made a movie like this. I mean, it's a giant monster movie, and they created a giant artificial monster and showed it on screen. And that's just so amazing to me. And even almost more amazing, just behind the movie itself, is the story behind the movie. And there's a DVD box set. I see Jonathan has it here. Well, you don't have the box set, but there's also a box set version of it, where it came out, I think it came out right before the Peter Jackson King Kong one did.
It's one of the best special editions ever.
It's a 2-disc special edition. You can also get it in a 3-pack that I did with King Kong, Son of Kong, and Mighty Joe Young. And Son of Kong and Mighty Joe Young are kind of fun movies to watch, but they're not as good as King Kong is. They're not like classics. But it also comes with, it comes with the 2-disc special edition or the 3-pack. The King Kong version comes with another DVD that's all special features, and it goes into how they made the special effects, and it wasn't just like stop motion. Like, they had to pioneer so much technology just to be able to show an actor on screen with a stop motion miniature.
The one that kills me is projecting things.
Yeah, like they would have like a small camera. It's like they would project footage that they had shown earlier, like one frame at a time, to move with the stop motion. So it's like they did stop motion footage to put like Fay Ray in with the monster. And it's just like so many of the little technical things are so cool. There's one really awesome sequence where there's this, it's kind of like this famous lost sequence in film where there's this cut scene where in the
spider pit?
Yeah, the spider pit, where they're running away from, I think they're running away from the like Stegosaurus like thing or whatever it is, and they like are falling into this pit. And there was going to be in the original sequence, they fall into this pit where there are these like big spiders and like a big scorpion, like these large insects, and they have to escape. But they cut it from the movie, and nobody has found the original footage. So nobody, like, there's like some storyboards. I think one of the miniatures used for like the spider was recovered or something like that. But there's this whole section where Peter Jackson and a team of people recreate that scene, and like you see how they do it using how they would imagine it would have been filmed, using like actual stop motion figurines and like the techniques that would have been available to them at the time. And it's just like that documentary is incredibly fascinating, and it shows a lot about the sort of the ingenuity, the creativity, and just like the sheer amount of effort that had to go into creating a movie like this, where you had an artificial creature on screen that, like, even just figuring out doing stop motion, that's just such an interesting idea of how you would shoot film. And creating all those, like, super detailed miniatures and all the dedication it takes to move it one frame at a time. I mean, and doing the awesome fight scene between King Kong and the T-Rex, where it's like, it's so brutal how he kills the T-Rex by, like, he just, like, opens its mouth and breaks its mouth by, like, just, like, pulling it apart.
And then keeps going and, like, smashing. And
it's just, it's such, I just, like, this is just a movie that I watched a lot when I was a kid, and I continue to watch it today, and I just feel like it has more imagination and creativity in, like, 5 minutes of King Kong than, like, almost any other movie I've seen in my entire life. Certainly most movies that come out today. It's just...
Well, I think with some exceptions, and there's some big exceptions, obviously, I think most movies today, because it's so easy and automatic to create CGI effects, and no one has to think about, well, wait, how will we create this alien planet? We'll just do it CGI. There's not as much creativity or
and there's not as much
care
put into it. Like, there's like blood and sweat and tears in, like, every frame of King Kong, and you can feel the dedication and just, like, the creativity that had to go in to make a movie like this, especially when it's the first of its kind. And for being the first of its kind, it's one of the best examples of that sort of genre. It makes the monsters empathetic. You kind of you feel bad for it once it gets taken back to New York and it's chained up. It's got. I really like the performances by, like, Bruce Cabot, the main cast, the Bruce Cabot and Fay Wray.
They're really good. Yeah,
it's like, even though it's cheesy old school style acting, it's good cheesy old school style acting. Yeah. And I mean, it's just like I love this movie so much, and I hope if people haven't seen it, because it's one of those movies that a lot of people don't watch because they feel like they basically have already seen it because it's so ingrained in the pop culture, like, mindset. And it's such an influential movie, but I would urge you to watch it, and especially watch the documentary so you can begin to appreciate how much effort had to go into making a movie like this.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll talk a little bit about the Peter Jackson.
I'd like to talk about that. I'm a little more familiar with it just because I did not see King Kong as a kid like you did.
Yeah.
I have it now. I own the DVD. I need to watch it again just to, sort of shake my memory of it.
Yeah. One of the nice things about movies made in, like, the 30s is that they're, like, 80 to 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's just like they're not a long sit.
Not 3 hours long?
Yeah, it's just not like, that's the biggest complaint I have for the Peter Jackson King Kong, is it's way too long of a movie.
And it's sort of an interesting thing where I love a lot about the Peter Jackson version, and there's clearly a lot of heart in it. Like, he really cared about the material.
Obviously Peter Jackson really loves King
King Kong.
I
think it's an example of how you can use CGI at its very best.
Yeah, I mean, that CGI King Kong is one of the best examples of a CGI character I've seen. Because they put so much care into making it.
But I do wonder if Peter Jackson, he had just done the most financially successful cinematic venture of all time in Lord of the Rings, or profitable, and so no one was going to tell him this can't be 3 hours long. And I think he probably needed someone to say, Peter, you got to cut your movie down.
You've got to cut. I mean, what's ridiculous is it takes them like an hour and a half to get to Skull Island. They spend so much time on that goddamn boat.
I know,
and
I like a lot of the characters and characterization. You could just do it in less time. Like, I think Naomi Watts is really good. I really like Adrian Brody. I even like Jack Black in this movie, and I fucking hate Jack Black. So, there's
so
good
you have
stuff
no heart?
in it.
You don't like Jack Black?
He's terrible in a lot of movies.
Well, he's not a movie guy. I mean, no, he's like a Tenacious D guy.
Well, that's fine. That Jack Black is okay, but he needs to stop doing awful movies.
Okay.
Sorry. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, do you kind of agree with what I was saying about?
Yeah, I mean, I like Jack Black in that movie. I like the performance. I don't think it's a bad movie, but it's definitely I think some of the script needed to be rewritten, just it's not necessarily a movie you could fix just by editing it.
Okay.
But it's not like a terrible movie. I think it's worth a watch. Actually, interestingly enough, what's a really good game that nobody talks about is the King Kong video game for like the 360 that came out like with the movie right when the 360.
Is that actually good?
Yeah, it's a really good game. It actually does a lot of interesting things. Like the King Kong segments are really fun. You've got like I think you play as Adrian Brody's character as like a first person shooter type thing, and that's really cool because they have this whole thing where you have to you don't have like an ammo counter on screen. You have to press a button to check the clip to see how much ammo you have left in your gun. And it has like an actual clip-based ammunition system instead of like some ambiguous pool of ammo that you pull from, like most first-person shooters. It's a really good game that has a lot of interesting ideas that nobody talks about. It just like kind of like came out, like a lot of people were like, yeah, it's a pretty good game, and it's like, whoop, gone.
So if I can find that for $5, get it.
Yeah, if you can find it cheap, I totally recommend the King Kong video game. I would say I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the Peter Jackson King Kong movie.
Okay, cool. So that's your second favorite movie of all time?
Yes, the King Kong video game.
Okay, so my second favorite movie of all time. No, it does have a video game, doesn't it?
Yes, I've actually played that one too. It's okay. It's not that good, but.
It's The Godfather. We already talked about it in the previous podcast. It was Sean's number 7 favorite movie of all time. It is my second favorite movie of all time. And I don't have a whole lot to add from what we already talked about. Go back, if you haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to that to hear my thoughts on The Godfather and my interpretation of it as a very quintessentially American film. I guess what I'll say about The Godfather to start with is that I sort of inherited my love of this movie from my dad because he was a huge fan of it, and I remember for Father's Day one year, we got him the VHS box set back when that was the big thing, and it was so cool that these had been put out on VHS. And I don't know if that's how I first saw it, or when we later bought him the DVD set when it came out, and could finally see them in like widescreen and stuff. But however I first saw it, I was pretty young, probably younger than I should have been watching The Godfather, but I really fell in love with it. And almost every time I've watched it with my dad, and it's just a really fun experience we share, and that's at least part of my love for it.
Yeah.
It's because it's like, there's so many good memories attached to it. Like they showed it, the Cinemark movie chain did a night where they showed the original Godfather, and then a couple weeks later they did Godfather 2 on their XD screen, which is their version of IMAX. So this was basically Godfather on like an IMAX-esque screen in a 4K digital projection. Like, it would have been cool to see it on film, but this was the restoration they did for the Blu-ray, which is the best film restoration I've ever seen, bar none. It's gorgeous. And to see it on that size screen with the great sound and the crystal clear picture, and then my dad and we hadn't watched it in a while together, and it was like a revelation, like being cinematically born again, watching the greatness of The Godfather unfold on the big screen, and seeing how much Francis Ford Coppola really did compose that for a really large screen, and just how much detail is in every frame. But great movie. I do think from just a purely critical standpoint, I personally believe The Godfather is the best movie I've ever seen. It's got you were talking about drama and how it's like a pure drama.
Yeah, it's a drama.
That's what it does.
Yeah.
And it does so well, and it tells this great story, and you can interpret it and analyze it in so many different ways as much as you can. It's got so many great characters. It really combines everything I love in film. It's got a great cast of characters. It's got a perfect story. Really interesting story that you can analyze. It's got beautiful cinematography, great, editing. It's credited with sort of pioneering that idea of the montage that it does at the end, which is now often repeated and stuff. Mm-hmm. We studied that in film school. And then the music, which is so iconic and so good, and it's just everything about it I really, really love. I can watch it compulsively, and I love The Godfather 1 so much that to me, this is sort of an opinion that's very different from most people. I don't like Godfather 2 as much. I don't think it's still an A+ kind of movie.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, in Godfather 1, everything about it feels very compelling. But then you get to Godfather 2, and for me, Vito was always the most compelling character. In Godfather 1 also, even though Michael is great, I think having Vito there really helps Michael's story, so you can have them sort of directly contrasted.
Yeah.
And in Godfather 2, obviously they have the pioneering structure where they have Vito's story in the past and Michael's in the present. But to me, Vito's story and Robert De Niro's performance is so vastly more compelling personally that whenever they cut back to Michael and we have to watch Michael for like 50 minutes, it doesn't hit me in the same way, especially because most of the characters I loved in part 1 are dead, and he's interacting with characters I'm not as invested in, unless it's like Tom Hagen or someone who I really, or Fredo, who are really interesting. And sort of Michael's whole story, and it gets very convoluted with the stuff with Hyman Roth and whatnot, and it's not as interesting to me as the stuff that goes down either in Godfather 1 or in the Vito half of Godfather 2, and if you were actually to cut the Vito stuff together as like its own movie, that would be on par with Godfather 1 for me. That stuff is brilliant. And Robert De Niro, my God, that is just...
Yeah.
Not just on par with Marlon Brando, maybe better. That era Robert De Niro, him in that, and Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, he was a god. I don't know what happened to him either. Rocky and Bullwinkle. Did you know he was in a Rocky and Bullwinkle movie?
No, I didn't want to know that.
He was Fearless Leader.
No.
Russian accent and everything. Sorry. But yeah, I really love The Godfather. I know you agree with most of what I just said.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, it was on my list.
Yeah. Do you see what I mean about Part 2?
Yeah, it's like, I would... To me, like, I really like Part 2, but I think part of, like, what you're saying is, like, one of the reasons why The Godfather, to me, is more memorable, and that's why I put it on the list, is when I think about The Godfather, I think about Godfather 1, not 2. I think it's basically for the reasons you said. Yeah, I do think the dual narrative structure of Godfather Part 2 is really interesting. It's not used that well. Most times people try to use a narrative structure like that. It doesn't pan out very well, because you get more invested in one part than you do in the other, and then you get disappointed when it switches.
Well, and I guess the original cut of the movie was like 6 hours long, and Coppola had to decide which story to focus on more, and so he cut most of the Vito material, and if you get the DVD or Blu-ray set, you can watch it, and it's really good. And I think I would prefer a version of 2 where the weight is on Vito, and we have fewer cuts back to Michael, and sort of we weight it as Vito's story, and then Michael's is sort of the addendum.
I mean, I can see that, but it also doesn't really make sense to make the core story one that takes place in the past as opposed to the one that's going on right now.
But like, it's so satisfying when you get to the end and he returns to Sicily and he, goes and finds the guy who killed his family.
Yeah.
And he, takes him down, and then, he's building his family at the same time. Just such great stuff. And so many great scenes, like when he's trying to he's talking down the guy who won't give the lady back her apartment, like she's been defaulting on rent.
Yeah.
And the guy, and Vito is just sort of very casually trying to talk the guy down. And then the guy comes back after he's heard who Vito is. Stuff like that. I just love it. But I mean, obviously Al Pacino in Part 2 could not be better. That's a great performance. Very dark performance, but very good. And then, what are your thoughts on Godfather 3?
Godfather 3, it's like...
I don't hate it like some people.
I don't hate it, but it's like, it's so forgettable to me. Like, I don't care about The Godfather Part 3. Like, I watched it and I forgot about it, whereas Godfather Part 1 and Part 2 is like, are really ingrained in my mind. For the Part 3, it's like...
Part 3 to me is like the most unnecessary sequel ever made, because at the end of Part 2, that story is done. There's nothing more you can do without ruining things about Part 2, and that's what Part 3 does, is it tries to make you sympathetic with Michael again, and there's no point to that.
Yeah,
that goes against the themes of the movie, and then Al Pacino's not very good in it anymore.
Yeah, Al Pacino got to his crazy point. So.
Yes, he became a ham.
Yeah,
and there's the wonderful performance by Miss Sofia Coppola as his daughter. Daddy, I just hope this will bring us closer to together.
Yeah, it's just Part 3 is. I've only seen it once. I've seen the other ones multiple times, and I just forgot about it. I don't hate it, but it's like
there is an availability thing I do want to say about The Godfather, though, if you want to own it. And if you have a Blu-ray player, there's no Blu-ray I will recommend more than the Godfather trilogy set, because a restoration person named Robert A. Harris did the restoration on 1 and 2. 3 did not have a restoration because it's new and didn't need it. They look unbelievably gorgeous. Films from the 70s, like early 70s, that was late-era Technicolor, are some of my favorite looking live-action films. There's just a grain structure to it and a color structure that's really beautiful. And Godfather 1 and 2 have that, and they look so good on Blu-ray. There's not like a hint of print damage or anything, but they still look very grainy, like they're on 35 millimeter. So they're just beautiful prints, and there's so many good bonus features and stuff. You get a commentary with Coppola on each movie that's pretty fascinating, so that's the way to go. But Sean, let's hear about your number one favorite movie of all time.
My number one favorite movie of all time, what is fun and adventure incarnate, is The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. A movie that most of you probably don't know about and most of you probably haven't seen, but when I was creating the list, I knew that it had to be my number one favorite movie of all time, because I'll recognize it's probably mostly nostalgia, but it's a movie that's just so fun to watch. And it's only like 90 minutes. It feels like you watch it and it's like 1 minute has passed and you're like ready to watch it again. It's just such an amazing movie to me, and it's kind of everything like in King Kong, but even more so because it just takes all the adventure and the creativity, and it's like really the point of the movie. But Seventh Voyage of Sinbad is about Sinbad, and he's
Really?
Yes, it's about Sinbad. It's like all the characters are supposed to be Arabian, but they're all played by white people, so you have to get like kind of the racist part out of the way. But it's like, I mean, we did Prince of Persia starring Jake Gyllenhaal like last year, so I guess we haven't gotten over that racist part of our society. But yeah, so it's starring. I mean, there's almost no point to really explain the plot. The plot is Sinbad. I think his girlfriend, who's like the princess or something, she gets kidnapped by like an evil sorcerer guy. Sinbad has to go save her. He goes to an island that has a bunch of monsters on it. He finds a genie that has like this little it's like this little boy genie thing that's like in this lamp. It's actually really good. They go like into the lamp and they have like kind of this cool effect with like all this mist. And basically it's about Sinbad saving his girlfriend with a genie from like a dragon, a cyclops, like a giant vulture bird monster. And all the effects are done by Ray Harryhausen, who is the apprentice of Willis O'Brien, who did the stop-motion effects in King Kong. And Ray Harryhausen did a whole bunch of movies in like the late 50s and the 60s. Like his most famous one is Jason and the Argonauts, using stop-motion effects for all the monsters. And they're just... It's like you can tell that he like refined stop-motion effects to like a precise art form. And just all the creativity where he did like the models by hand and like all the... Like, the Cyclops is so cool looking, and, like, the dragon is so cool, and the Cyclops and the dragon fight each other, and it's, like, so freaking awesome, because it's a Cyclops and a dragon, and they're fighting each other, and just, all the stop-motion effects are just so well done. The movie just looks great, and it just moves at this really fast pace, and everything just looks so beautiful. The models on the monsters are just so cool looking, and if you have children... You have to show them this movie, because I can't stress it. If you're a kid and you watch this movie, it's like the most amazing thing ever. And there's this really great quote that I from Tom Hanks when they were doing. I think Ray Harryhausen won. It was some like film like Lifetime Achievement Award or something like that. And Tom Hanks was speaking, and he said something along the lines. It's like a lot of people say like The Godfather or Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made, but to me always. The greatest movie ever made is Jason and the Argonauts. To me, it's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Similar movies, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad is a little bit cooler because it's got a Cyclops and it's got a dragon, and they fight each other. I can't stress that enough. They fight each other, and it's awesome. And just it's like really cheesy, but it's almost like, honestly, it feels like the kind of movie that Indiana Jones is homaging. Like, it's that kind of like... I mean, it isn't literally like one of the B-movie serials that Indiana Jones is directly taking off. But it's kind of got that same spirit of adventure, and it's got like kind of cheesy acting, kind of cheesy effects that I think are really cool. It's like it doesn't take itself very seriously, and it has so much fun with itself. It's like the sorcerer guy is just an evil asshole. Sinbad's just like a really cool dude. The princess is really hot, and the genie guy is kind of cool. I mean, I always thought I like the genie in this more than Aladdin. Like Aladdin genie, Robin Williams is just annoying. This genie's cool. He like helps people out.
I don't think you even need to say that, Sean. It's kind of automatic.
It's just this movie's just so much fun to watch. And it was just like, it was a really interesting experience because I hadn't watched it since I was like 12 years old when I watched it like every single day of my life. And then like a year ago, I was like, that Seventh Voyage of Sinbad movie, that was really good. And I sat down and I watched it and I was expecting it's like, I'd kind of have fun with it, but it wouldn't be as good as I remember. It's like, it was exactly how I remember it. It was like just as awesome when the Cyclops and the dragon fight each other. It was fucking awesome. And so... That's the greatest movie ever made, in my opinion. It's my favorite movie. It's just like the good parts of what like makes up mankind distilled into a movie that you like play and you watch. And it's got a Cyclops and a dragon that they fight each other.
You cannot stress that enough.
I can't stress it enough. It's got a Cyclops and a dragon and they fight each other. And it's the first movie of, I think there are 3 Sinbad movies, but like all the Sinbad movies, the only like link they have is that it stars a character named Sinbad, and they have stop motion special effects. But like the guy who plays Sinbad changes. Like there's no continuity between the movies. Like the second one, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, actually has a really young Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, playing the villain. Who's supposed to be Arabian, so it's really weird having Tom Baker playing an Arabian sorcerer. But the sequels aren't quite as good. I mean, they're still fun movies to watch.
Yeah.
They rehash the Cyclops, but it doesn't fight a dragon, so it's not as cool. There's like one that has like the main monster is like a tiger, but there's no dragon, there's no Cyclops, and they don't fight, so it's not as cool. But yeah, it's just all of those Ray Harryhausen movies. Honestly, would be kind of like occupy that sort of spot where it's just so much fun to watch. Like Jason the Argonauts is just like that. All the Sinbad movies are just like that. Any stop motion Ray Harryhausen movie has so much fun, energy, creativity, excitement, and just adventure to it. It's like everyone in the family can enjoy, and it makes you happy.
Nice.
And there's a Cyclops and a dragon, and they fight each other. So
is that all you have to say?
Yep.
Okay. Well, my number. Here's something I want to say. How long is the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad? Do you think? 90?
Probably like 90 minutes ish. Okay. I don't know specifically, but it's like
my favorite movie of all time is roughly 8-9 times as long.
It depends on if you're doing extended cut or theatrical edition.
Yes. Okay. My number one favorite movie of all time is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And Sean, you're very stingy about ties on lists like this. Is it okay to have a tie for this one, for these 3 movies together?
Yeah, because, I mean, that's the way I think. I don't think about Lord of the Rings as 3 different installments, either movie or book, just because it's one long... It's like Two Towers isn't a sequel to Fellowship of the Ring. It's a direct continuation.
And they were made at the same time.
Yeah. They were written to be one story, but they didn't want to publish 1,000-page books. They're like, J.R.R., as long as you split it up. Okay. It's like, fine.
So Lord of the Rings motion picture trilogy. Oh, I don't even know where to begin. I love these movies so much. And I think, you were talking about Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and being something you saw as a kid and just sort of captured your imagination.
Yeah.
I've always said...
There's Cyclops, and there's a dragon, and they fight each other.
Well, anyway, I was going to say, Fellowship of the Ring, seeing that in theaters opening night, was the moment I always pinpoint as the moment I fell in love with movies, and like there was no going back. That movie just showed me what the outer limits of filmmaking could do if you had a big enough imagination and the talent involved to pull it off, and a good enough story to tell. Mm-hmm. And obviously Two Towers and Return of the King are just as good and follow up on that. But it was just such a revelatory experience, and seeing each of them, it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
Yeah.
And when I watched them today, that sense of wonder just has not dissipated. And part of that is, I don't want to focus on the special effects too much, but you keep talking about, how great practical effects are.
I will say the special effects in Lord of the Rings are the best modern special effects any movie has done.
But what I'm going to say is that's because they minimalized CGI as much as possible.
They did as much practical effects as they possibly could, and that's what makes the effects so convincing.
And it has not aged a day, because all of the things... the biggest CGI creation is Gollum, and they focus so much on him, he still looks great. And you couldn't do him any other way.
Yeah.
CGI should be only used for stuff you literally could not do otherwise. And Gollum you couldn't, Yeah. And that's just... I don't even know where to start with Lord of the Rings, except to say that I guess... I read the books before the movies came out, or the book... before the movies came out, and that really captured my imagination, but I was probably too young to really fully understand it at the time, and I've come to respect the books more and more the more I read them and the more I grow up. But the movie was just, when I saw it the first time, it's this 3-hour epic, Fellowship of the Ring, but it doesn't feel 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's the fastest 3 hours, or 3.5 with extended cut, that you'll ever sit through. And I think the vividness of the world, that Peter Jackson was clearly so on Tolkien's wavelength, and all the designers and everything, and the actors, and just everyone, it was like, those are the characters. No one else could play that part. There's not a single miscast role in the entire trilogy. That's what gets me.
Yeah.
Is that there's like dozens and dozens of characters, and not only are they all cast well, but the actors just hit it out of the park. All of them.
Yeah.
And it's just so good. And they made every correct adaptation choice. Like Lord of the Rings is what I point to when I say that's how books should be adapted. Because they were very liberal in adapting Tolkien.
Yeah.
They changed stuff, they cut stuff, they added stuff, but there's not a single change I wouldn't have made myself if I were, as smart and talented a filmmaker as Peter Jackson and his crew. Mm-hmm. Because you had to do that to make it cinematic and to make it resonate. And I think the movies work on so many different levels. They're this epic story that continues through, 9, 12 hours of movies, depending on which version you're watching. But also these great character dramas and these character arcs and this story of this big nation, but also these micro-level stories. And it's everything I love in movies. There's so much subtext you can get into and so much to analyze because Tolkien had so much to say, and I don't think they got rid of any of it. They found ways to work in all of Tolkien's thematic interests into these 3 movies. But then all the characters, too, and all the action sequences, like, those are such great epic warfare action sequences.
Yeah, like
I don't know how... I've watched all the bonus features like 6 times. I still don't quite understand how they pulled it off.
My favorite... That's one of the cool things about Lord of the Rings. If you don't have, like, the box sets with the extended editions, they're, like, my favorite DVD box sets I have. Because the special features are so detailed, and I love going into... There's, like, one where they're talking about how they made the battle at Helm's Deep, and they, like, had to create this program that, like, had, like, a lot of the soldiers are digital, but they had, like, a sort of, like, almost a video gamey, like, artificial intelligence thing where it's, like, each, like, squadron of guys could possibly do a different thing when they were, like, running the simulation to just, like, make it seem more naturalistic. So it's, like, when you're looking at it, it's not just, like, 100,000 people just standing there. They're all kind of, like, doing something.
Yeah. I mean, and that's part of probably why I love these movies so much, is I was able to immerse myself in the making of them with the DVDs, because they're so thorough, and there's so many, and there's such entertaining bonus features, and well made, and I feel like I was there for the making of them too, because I got so in depth, and I think it was also, there's an experience, and it's partially nostalgia that comes with these movies of, you would see one opening day when it comes out, and they had to wait a year, but you didn't feel unsatisfied because they made each movie work as a standalone experience too.
Yeah.
Where, like, Two Towers, it's like, oh, I can't wait for Return of the King, but I'm okay waiting because Helm's Deep was so great, and there's so much to explore in that movie. And then Return of the King, the payoff that movie delivers could not be better. I mean, it's like the greatest, longest third act in movie history.
Yeah, and I do love how I think Return of the King is probably the weirdest one when you watch it on, like, its own without having recently seen the others.
Yeah.
Because you don't appreciate the necessity for, like, the 5 climaxes at the end of the Return of the King. It's like, but when you watch it all as, like, kind of like one big story, it's like you understand. It's like, okay, we need to finish this part. We need to, like, kind of have some resolution with these characters and these characters because it's so long.
I always prefer long endings like that when you've got a story that, you know, requires it, and it really does. And each ending hits home really well. And it's, again, I mean, Lord of the Rings is one we will do a whole podcast on. Because The Hobbit's coming out, we're going to do at least multiple podcasts, I'm sure, on Lord of the Rings. So we'll get into it deeper later. But Lord of the Rings really taught me what film can do, and it's still to this day, every time I watch it, it sort of renews my love of the cinematic medium and reminds me why I watch movies and write about them in the first place. And I guess a good way to take this discussion is, do you have a favorite character in the cinematic version of Lord of the Rings?
I would have to say either Gandalf the Grey specifically or Aragorn.
That was going to be my answer too. Because Ian McKellen in Fellowship of the Ring is one of my... You know what? I've said this before. It's my favorite performance ever. I love him.
He's just so... It's like, and I just love also that there's a difference between Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. Yeah. And Gandalf the Grey, he's just so... I mean, he's got... I mean, you obviously can tell that he's, like, really powerful and he has, like, this serious side, but he's also kind of like this kind of goofy, like, happy old guy who's, like, willing to kind of play around with the hobbits, even though he's, like, a demigod that's been around for thousands of years.
Yep. And again, suggesting a larger universe. We talked about that with Blade Runner and Star Wars. Lord of the Rings does that so well.
And obviously they had so many, just because of the fastidiousness of J.R.R. Tolkien and so meticulously constructing such a large fictional universe. Yeah. And they had so much stuff to work with. Peter Jackson was able to implement it all so well, especially just like the locations they found in New Zealand are so incredible. Where it's so amazing to me that there's like they found a spot on Earth that looks like Middle Earth. Yeah. Like how it's like you've got the mountain ranges, you've got the plains of Rohan, you've got like the mountains for like where Helm's Deep would be, you've got like Fangorn Forest, you've got every like place you need to go in Lord of the Rings on one frickin' island. It's amazing.
And that's why it's one of the reasons I'm so excited for The Hobbit, is to revisit these places and find new ones. And if you watch some of his production diaries...
I only watched the first few, and then I decided I didn't want to spoil too much behind the scenes.
But I still, seeing them go around and looking for locations like this is going to be awesome. So, yeah, my favorite, Aragorn, Viggo Mortensen is so good in that part. And it's actually a part I think they really improved from the book.
Yeah, I mean, they changed it. There's a lot of stuff that people, like, well, the things that people get on about that they changed in the Lord of the Rings movies most are the stuff about the characters. And Aragorn is probably the one that's other than maybe Arwen, has changed the most.
But I think they're necessary.
Yeah, especially because people don't understand that cinema, like the structure of narrative in cinema, is so different from a book, especially like the kind of book like Lord of the Rings that's so long and sprawling.
It's more like a history.
Yeah, and it's like it's paced so differently. Where Aragorn doesn't have a super clearly defined character arc in the books. He's in the books.
He's already had it when we meet him.
When you meet Aragorn, he's already ready to take up the broken sword. He's already ready to go back to Gondor and reclaim the throne. He's gone through that stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that you can, like, extra stuff, like in the Silmarillion that you can find, that explores Aragorn's character development when he was younger and living with the elves. But when creating a movie, they did this multiple times in the Lord of the Rings films. They had to create a character arc for the character, because you need to have that in a movie. You can't. I mean, it's almost very British in the Lord of the Rings novels that there isn't some like super defined character arc for most of the characters. And in the movies, they had to create that sort of sense that Aragorn needs to be at a different spot at the end than he is at the beginning as a person. He needs to understand himself as now being ready to take up the throne. Where in the movies, obviously at the beginning, he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't feel he's good enough for it. He doesn't feel he's prepared to take up the throne.
And Viggo Mortensen, I cannot say enough good things about. It was an instantly iconic performance.
Yeah.
And so good. And Viggo Mortensen, if you've seen any of his other work, he is a brilliant, brilliant actor.
Yeah.
And to bring that same level of brilliance to Aragorn in Lord of the Rings is just great. And I think, the undersung acting hero of the trilogy to me is actually Sean Astin as Sam.
He's so good as Samwise Gamgee.
He does not get the respect he deserves for it either. I mean, I think fans really love him, but the critical community didn't recognize him the way they needed to, because he holds all the Hobbit sides of those stories together.
Yeah, I mean, Sam is really
the heart of the story.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost more the main character, if you can say there's a main character, than Frodo.
Yeah, and Elijah Wood is great.
Yeah,
Elijah Wood was perfect casting. No one else could play Frodo that well, but
Sam, I mean, because Sam, I mean, even in the books, he has the most. Yeah. Because Sam figures out he has to become a warrior, and he has to fight for Frodo, especially when he gets taken, like after the fight with Shelob.
Tolkien very clearly positions Sam as the dynamic character of the series, and but they do great work with everyone. Merry and Pippin are so well done, and so funny and great acting, and I just it's all great.
Just like all the fellowship with like Gimli and Legolas, like everyone is just
Sean Bean's Boromir is.
God, I love it. Even though it kind of. I mean, that was one of the weird things where I haven't watched Game of Thrones, but I remember when they had, like, the teaser image, and it's like, why is Boromir? Like, it's like, it looks like he's basically kind of wearing the same clothes he is when they're going through, like, the Tartarus Pass, like, when Saruman's, like, yelling and making the mountain snow fall. Yeah. It's like he's standing on the snow. It looks like he has Boromir's sword. He's got, like the kind of fuzzy cloak on. It's like, why is...
And I'm glad you mentioned Craterus Pass and the Mines of Moria, because that whole Mines of Moria sequence is, like, maybe my favorite extended sort of thrilling action adventure sequence in a movie.
Yeah, because it builds up so well where they've got like it's like because it's like it starts where they go out to the door and there's like kind of like the suspense with the Watcher in the water and they're trying to figure out the password, and then once they go in it's almost becomes a sort of a thriller in a way where it's like it's really slowly building the suspense with like the goblins, and then they find the Tomb of Balin. And, like, he's like, I just love that scene where Ian McKellen's reading from the book, and it's like he's reading, like, their last moments, like, drums in the deep. Yeah. We cannot get out.
And then
they are coming.
And then
it cannot get out.
If you're talking about, like, a great action scene built around small space, the staircase scene.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. And then, of course, the bridge scene with my favorite scene in the trilogy of Gandalf. You shall not... pass! And it's so iconic, but it never gets less awesome. Yeah. It gets more awesome every time I see it.
And just the design of the Balrog is so cool looking.
But, okay, we probably have to stop gushing about it. The last thing I do want to say about Lord of the Rings, and I think it's the thing that ties the whole trilogy together, is the music by Howard Shore is the greatest undertaking, without question, in the history of film music. He set out to compose more than just like a symphony or a score. It was a musical universe, and it's all beautiful, and there's a motif not just for every character, but for every
like every
theme.
For like every nation.
Yeah,
there's like Gondor has its own style, Rohan has its own style, and the Hobbit has its own style.
And if you have the complete recording soundtracks, which are each over 4 hours, there's more music for the trilogy than there is actual movie time. But it's
Which
brilliant.
is amazing.
Yeah.
Considering how long the movies are.
Yeah. And so he wrote a 12-hour score that develops and gets better and better, and I don't know how he did it, but it's amazing. So, and that's, I guess, the last thing we'll say about Lord of the Rings for now. Do you have anything else to add?
I mean, the Lord of the Rings was one I probably would have put on my list, but I knew that it was your number one, so I was like, we can talk about that one, so it makes my list a bit easier. I mean, these are also kind of like the same thing with you. It's like, it was the first, other than, I saw Star Wars earlier, because we have the copies, but like Lord of the Rings was the first modern, it's my favorite modern movie. I don't like a lot of modern movies, because I just kind of grew up with a lot of the older stuff, so I like that style more. But Lord of the Rings has done what I think a modern movie should be, especially in a fantasy setting, where it builds that J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth out so well. And I'm just so freaking excited for The Hobbit to come out.
I know. I mean, I think
The Hobbit's also my favorite book since when I was a kid.
The Hobbit is even better source material. Like, if they can pull that off, it's going to be... And all signs point to yes at this point. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
That trailer, I've never been so excited by a trailer. I mean, I've written diatribes against people for getting excited or mad about movie trailers because I think it's stupid, but I'm guilty of it with The Hobbit because it looks so good.
Damn good trailer.
I mean, hell, I'm just excited to hear more Howard Shore music.
I mean, I'm just really excited to hear all the different compositions of the song because The Hobbit has a lot of songs, and since it's a much more focused book, I'm hoping we get to include a lot more of them.
Are you okay with the idea of splitting it into two movies?
Yeah, I'm fine because with that because I like that they're going to explore some of the other stuff, like a lot of the stuff that's in the Silmarillion and the appendices and stuff like that of other stuff going on. Because The Hobbit, as it stands, the original product isn't even a part of the Middle-earth universe, technically. He later realized that he was kind of put that into the fiction he had already developed when he was in the war. And so they kind of built all that out, and there's a lot of kind of really interesting, important things, especially with what Gandalf's doing. Because Gandalf's usually not with the team in the book. You think about Gandalf and you think he's there all the time, but really when you're reading the book, it's like, fuck, Gandalf's just left again. He leaves every 5 minutes, fucker.
I think that's what I'm most excited to see is more Gandalf the Grey by Ian McKellen. And Gandalf when he's a dick to everyone, and he's such a dick to the dwarves and Frodo, Bilbo, I mean, it's great. And Martin Freeman as Bilbo is perfect casting.
Great casting.
Should be great, so... Those are our 10 favorite movies of all time.
I do have to say one thing. I mean, I love The Lord of the Rings, but one thing it needed a Cyclops, and it needed a dragon, and they needed to fight each other. And that never delivered on that front. And I thought that was disappointing.
Okay. So, you're listening to this 2 weeks from when we're recording it, actually, because we're sort of doing this all at once. We've been podcasting for 5 hours now.
Yeah, Jesus.
So, but from when you are listening to this, we will be back next Wednesday. That's when podcasts are coming out. And we will be having an in-depth discussion of the Spider-Man trilogy in anticipation for The Amazing Spider-Man. We'll talk about some other Spider-Man related stuff
Spider-Man
as well.
Does whatever a spider can, and we're done.